Have you had your coffee? Lots of coffee. So get ready because this session is going to be awesome. It's going to be provocative. It's going to be, I have been insisting with this keynote speaker for him to come, and he was kind of hesitating, but we convinced him with the help of Rebecca, my friend. Rebecca is one of the founders of Global Voices Online, but she now is the founder of Ranking Digital Rights, which is a project of New America, and Rebecca is awesome. She's a former CNN journalist who came to the blogging world and created with Ethan this wonderful thing that is Global Voices Online that I have been involved for more than 10 years also. So Rebecca, you can introduce our yes, go there, yes.
I'll call you up, okay. Well, first of all, I just have to thank you, Rosenthal.
Oh, you're welcome.
Rosenthal is a very wise man.
Thank you.
I wrote a book that unfortunately 10 people read, but I quoted him in my book, and I continue to quote him in talks, particularly a thing he said about our information ecosystem and how it's changed. You know, that we used to live in a world of information scarcity, and all our institutions were built for that, and then the rains came. We're in a rainforest, and we still haven't figured it out. And I'm quoting Rosenthal on that over and over and over again, because it really speaks to, I think, where we are today. And so thank you. But I'm here to introduce Dave Weiner, who is an old friend. And really, if it weren't for Dave and what he'd done before, and I met Dave when I got to Harvard around the time I left CNN, and he was at the Berkman Center. He was a research fellow at the Berkman Center, and he had helped the Berkman Center set up a blogging server, and we all started blogging. And Dave ran these blogger cons, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And that was really what got me excited about the democratization of journalism, the democratization of speech. Of public speech in a way that I found very exciting, and was one of the big reasons why I decided not to go back to CNN. So I'm just thrilled and honored to be leading this conversation with Dave and the room. And we're not going to do it as a classic keynote speech. We're going to have a conversation and involve the whole room as much as possible. There's, I think, a couple of you who were at the old blogger cons and may be familiar with that. So those of you who are familiar with that approach, feel free to jump in and lead the way. And please, come out. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. So what should we talk about?
Well, gee. So before we get started, before I ask you a more serious question, I'm going to ask you an unserious question.
Oh, okay.
Which is that back in the day when you ran the blogger conferences, blogger cons, there was always a song.
Yeah, there was.
So.
You think we should do a song today?
Yeah, you should do the song thing.
Well, you know how we did it? So I would stand up in front of the room, and this happened at the first BloggerCon, and I actually didn't know I was going to do it when we started, and I just said, what's the song?
So what's the song?
What's the song? And so what's the song? What song should we sing to get started? What's a good song that we get everybody going out of their heads?
Okay,
okay.
Do it.
It has to be a song that we all know. That should be one of
maybe a
the
lot of
criteria for it. Like Happy Birthday is a good one. Rock and roll? I don't know that. That's not a song. That's a category of song.
Yeah, I know. Yellow Submarine.
Rock and roll music. It's like Yellow Submarine was one of the favorites.
I can see clearly now the rain is gone.
Well, we could put this off, or we could just wait.
We could come back to it. Or, yeah.
Say again?
Oh, feeling good.
Yeah,
I don't
this-
know that one. You want to
I don't
lead us
even
in that
know.
one?
This is, what?
Yellow
Yellow
Submarine.
Okay.
Okay, should we do that?
So, yeah, and you should sing it out of key.
Yeah.
We all live in a yellow submarine. A yellow submarine. A yellow submarine. Jay, we all live in a yellow submarine. A yellow submarine. A
Yellow submarine.
Simple song.
Da, da, da,
Yeah. And the band was all whatever.
I forget. Anyway,
So are you all out of your heads now?
are you all
And if we
awake?
call on you, will you be embarrassed? Because it's not like anything to be embarrassed about.
Right.
I'm embarrassed right now, though.
Yeah.
Just thought I should get that out of the way.
I'm embarrassed because I sing terribly.
Yeah. Well, I got told at one BloggerCon that I shouldn't sing because I sing out of key, and I said, "You don't get it. That's
Yeah,
the whole
that's the
point.
whole point of
That's the whole
blogging."
point." Yeah, exactly.
So, getting to the point,
Yes. What point?
so you are blogger number one,
I guess. Yeah.
essentially, right? This is blogger number one. So how the heck did that happen?
Oh, it wasn't like I woke up one morning and said, I think that blogging is something I should do. It wasn't like that at all. I started out, I was just a programming project. I had a great list of contacts. I've been going to tech industry conference. That's where I'm from. I'm from the tech industry. I had started a software company in the early 1980s. And I've been going to conferences. I had had a great Rolodex, and I wrote a script that would just send emails to it was spam basically, but this is before spam existed. And and so I sent an email announcing a press conference that a friend was going to have, and then I sent it to groups of 11. That was sort of the idea, just a random number, and then I followed it up with a report basically on what had happened there. And then I remember exactly where I was when I had this it was almost an epiphany that I could use this same little script to send out my own ideas. And so I had been, at that time, visiting I had sold my company, we had done an IPO, I was basically looking for the next thing to do. And so I had been going around to all kinds of tech companies and finding out what they were working on, and then writing them sort of advice, which they weren't listening to. And I just decided to take the first one of those things and just send it out to everybody. And people reacted they thought, this is weird, what's he doing, So then I did another one. The first one was about, I wanted Apple and IBM to work together. I wanted IBM to sell the Mac OS. Because at the time, well, I don't want to go into too much detail. Then I did one about PDAs. PDAs were like the precursor to the iPhone. And then I got a response from a friend of mine who was the CEO of Motorola's PDA division, a guy named Randy Patat. And so I sent that out to everybody. And I got back a whole bunch more responses. And what this led to was, then the next epiphany was that, wow, this changes how everything works. This is different. That the world that the tech industry is envisioning isn't the world that's actually going to happen. Because if I'm just an individual and I can create this kind of effect in the world just because I had the idea that, well, things like AOL, CompuServe, Microsoft had just launched a competitor to CompuServe called Marvel. And so I wrote a piece called Bill Gates versus the Internet. And because Bill Gates was dominant at that point in the tech industry. And I said, Bill Gates is betting his company on Marvel, and it's not going to work. Because look at this internet thing. It's got a manual that's that thin, and anybody can do this. And so I got a response from Bill Gates, and I ran that. And that made the earth shake. Everybody said, wow, look what just happened. And it just kept building. It wasn't like everything we did from that point, every experiment we tried, not everyone. There were certainly some things that didn't work, and we backed off those and didn't pursue them. But it was a continual process all the way through, I would say, the early 2000s. So this is like all the way up to the point where we met in 2003 and beyond. I mean, it just kept growing. There are new ideas. In 1999, I wrote a piece called Edit This Page. That's where we cracked the nut in terms of how to make this stuff actually easy so that normal people could write what eventually became known as blog posts. But that wasn't the end. So it was a process. It obviously there was an idea here.
Right.
You know, that's how you sort of you're sort of feeling your way around. This is how technology evolution works: is you're feeling your way around in a sort of a dark room, and you're trying to grab things here and there. And if you find that there's something here, you just go in that direction for a while.
Right.
And this one had a lot of room for growth, and that's why I found it so exciting, both as a technologist, and I didn't know that I was going to be a writer. That was never my assumption that I was going to do that. But out of that, I ended up getting a journalism gig. I wrote at Wired for 2 years. That was a blast.
And you also collaborated with journalists in a lot of different ways, like in San Francisco during the newspaper strike. What was
I
it,
didn't mention that.
94, right?
That was in 94, right. So after having, I don't know if this is before or after Bill Gates versus the internet, but there was a newspaper strike in San Francisco in the fall of 1994. And I had wanted to do a project with the web. I didn't really know how that worked. And I heard on the radio that there was going to be a San Francisco newspaper strike, so I called up Bruce Coons, who was at the San Jose Mercury News. I was living in the Bay Area at the time. And I said, I hear you guys are going on strike. Do you need some help? And he said, yeah. And so I got out my scripts and I started writing stuff. And we wrote a little content management system for the strike paper. And I was working for all kinds of incredible journalists because people all over the country were contributing, news people all over the country were contributing to this strike paper. It's sort of like the guard was down. You know, there was no sort of critical, normally when you knock on the door of a news organization, you say, let's work together on a project. Well, they have all kinds of reasons why they won't do it. But when they're going on strike and they need to get the strike paper out the next day, if you offer to help them, they accept the help. And what was really weird about it was the guy who taught me about how to do this stuff was a guy named Chris Gulker. And he was working at the San Francisco Examiner at the time. And he was working on the management newspaper on the web. And we just shared code. I mean, it was like the weirdest behind-the-scene collaboration you ever saw, because I don't think either of us, I mean, Chris is no longer with us, so he can't tell you, but I don't think either of us had any skin in the game in terms of the strike. The strike was, believe it or not, was about automation. We were against automation. I was doing automation for the strike that was against automation. It was a weird, but I didn't care. I just wanted the opportunity to do this, and it was great.
Yeah, and one of the things you've written about on your blog recently is about the thrill when you first started blogging of, you're a source. Journalists would call you up, interview you, and then you'd get. Then your words would be published. But as a blogger, you were a source that went directly to the public.
And that became a slogan, sources go direct, yeah.
Right. Yeah. And sort of from that, I imagine you probably were thinking at the time, where this would lead in 20, 25 years.
Yeah.
What did you imagine?
Only goodness. I was very excited about the future, and I was right in some ways and I was wrong in others. One of the ways I was wrong is I thought everybody would blog. And so I would approach people as if, of course, you're going to blog, right? But most people don't have the impulse to do it. They just don't. So I learned about this, what I ended up calling natural-born bloggers. Mm-hmm. There are, you're a natural-born blogger. I am a natural-born blogger. All the people who ended up becoming, Jay is, of course, a natural-born blogger. You know who you are. There must be other people in the room. Could ask for a show of hands. Who thinks they're a natural-born blogger? See?
We've got
Look at that. It's like, that's about it. I mean, it's 1, 2, 3% of the population. My mom was a natural born blogger. My father was not. That's where I got the gene from, So, so that was the first misunderstanding. Doc Searles was the first person that I encountered on my sort of Johnny Appleseed thing, where I was going out trying to get everybody to blog.
Yeah.
Doc Searles, totally. Now, I don't know how many people know Doc, but he's totally a natural-born blogger. The other thing is I had no concept that it could be used for ill. That I just saw goodness in this, and I think now we're getting, fast forward to 2019, we're really mostly getting the bad. And I think that's true because we're not collaborating. That the good that comes out of the blogosphere, which are people who, who are bloggers? Bloggers, in my opinion, and I didn't have this as clear then as I do now, bloggers are your sources. As journalists, assuming that most of the people here think of themselves as journalists, we're your sources. And there was a huge misunderstanding. It goes back to a long way, but I'm not going to be able to get the cartoon up there easily. So there was this incredible cartoon at the 2004 Democratic National Convention about what was the difference between a blogger and a journalist. And a journalist has all these credentials, a Pulitzer Prize, covered the White House, et cetera, et cetera. And a blogger's credentials were, I have a PC. Yeah, I know, everybody laughs at that one. And it wasn't funny to me, because at that point in time, this was, 2004, I was 49 years old.
Yeah, you had a lot of expertise.
I had a lot of credentials, to be honest. I had, worked my way through the tech industry and risen to the top. I had done an IPO. I had worked at Wired. I was a research fellow at Harvard University. That's a nice credential, right? I had a lot of experience, and I was not unusual amongst the people who were bloggers at the 2004 DNC. But that's the way journalists viewed us. I think they felt threatened by us, that these people would like to think of themselves as replacing journalism. And, to be fair, we probably did say at some points we were. It's quite possible.
You're certainly challenging the status quo.
Yeah, it's quite possible that I even said that at times too. But with the benefit of hindsight, it wasn't true. We weren't doing that. And so, my appeal today is we should be collaborating. We should be working with each other. I just want to, this isn't responsive to your question, but I've had a recent experience with Facebook. And I think people only see one side of Facebook and miss the other side. People see Facebook as a distribution system for journalism, a way of getting the journalism out to the people. But what I've discovered recently is Facebook is also an incredible way of organizing your sources. I moved from New York City, I was living in Manhattan, and now I live in the country, in upstate New York. And I had all the questions that people have when they move to a new area, and I was just going to ask my friends, where do you go for coffee in the morning? Where's a good place to shop for groceries? What airport should I fly out of? All these. And then I discovered that there was a private Facebook group just for the community. And it was a gold mine. It was incredible. I'd ask these questions like, where do I go for hikes? I need to walk every day for exercise. Huge response from that. And it's the impulse that people have, and I think we overlook this as a resource, that people want to show off what they know and they want to help. I think that the impulse to help people is one of the things that makes humanity great. And they might not be bloggers, but they love being sources. And so we ought to expand our view of where we go to find our sources. If there is no private Facebook, I hate Facebook as much as, probably more than most of you do, because they had a very negative effect on blogging. They sort of usurped blogging and then didn't feed the system back.
Yep.
So I do hate them for that, but I'm not going to, I don't know what the right way of explaining it is. It's like, I'm not going to punish myself because I hate them, that they happen to have done something phenomenal, which is organize, I don't know, it's not 100% of the people of the world,
Yeah.
not 100% of the people of the United States, but it might be 80%. And what an incredible milestone for humanity. I mean, you could reach 80% of the people who live in your country, assuming you live in the US, and it's true elsewhere in the world too. Why not take advantage of it?
So let's talk some more about Facebook.
Okay, sure.
So, you know, you and I were talking yesterday, and I've kind of felt this for a while, that, there's a lot of indignation about, what Facebook has done to journalism. But I tend to feel, and this is not my talk, so I'll let you kind of fill in most of the details, and maybe other people in the room have views. But I tend to feel that journalists do share some responsibility for Facebook having become so powerful, and are not sort of acknowledging, taking responsibility for this responsibility, as it were.
Where do I begin?
Yeah, so, if this is a good point for if anybody wants to jump in and interject and cease being passive audience and be part of the conversation, feel free. But yeah.
What specifically
Discuss.
would you like to know about?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, just it seems that. I don't know, about 10 years ago, when I started writing critically about Facebook, a lot of journalists were really surprised that I was being critical of it.
Well, the criticism of Facebook should have started 10 years ago, easily. Absolutely. And journalism was being very, we have a hand up, by the way. Let me just finish the thought and we'll get right to you. Can we get that cube up to her up there?
She needs a cube.
Yeah, up there.
There's a cube
That's
there.
our next speaker is up there.
Yeah, there's a hand.
But while we get it, it's got a long way to travel, but.
Let's migrate the cube. Whee!
Okay,
time to wake up.
Okay, let me finish the.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna do this.
Okay, so now Dave's gonna talk.
And then you're gonna.
And then she'll talk.
So last year, I think it was last year, was the Cambridge Analytica, was that the name of the company? It was like this big, huge controversy. And the press was writing about it, like they had discovered something and it was terrible. And I was going, how is this a discovery? Facebook announced to great fanfare in 2011 this whole idea of the open graph. And they explained very carefully what the implications of the open graph were. It meant that developers would have access to all the information that users were putting into Facebook. Now, if you heard Facebook would not get up and give that press conference today, right? But the alarms should have gone off at that point, and the questions should have come. It was like, well, what are the implications of this, And so, last year, 2018, in the aftermath of the 2016 election, they're looking for somebody to blame for what happened, and Facebook became the scapegoat, and Cambridge Analytica was the incident. But it's like analogous to complaining about a leaky faucet in Manhattan when all the faucets in Manhattan are leaking, and you have a flood going down the middle of the street. And people can't live there.
For years.
For years, the flood's been going on. That data that Cambridge Analytica had, I was a Facebook developer. I had access to all the same data. Now, I'm a nice person. I didn't want all that data, and I didn't want to do anything, nefarious with it. But if I had, and there were plenty of developers, plenty of venture capital-backed developers coming from Silicon Valley, they don't have a whole lot of ethics or they're there to make money. And I think people don't really have the right idea about the tech industry, which is another point. The journalism industry should have competed with Facebook. As soon as Facebook came up, Facebook presented a challenge to journalism that journalism still has not risen to. So you ask the question, why does Facebook get all the money? Why are you all trying to get money from Facebook? Some people here probably are from Facebook. Yeah. What?
Yeah, they fund.
They are. Yeah,
they're a funder.
Yeah, I didn't take the money. I paid my own airfare to come here because I didn't want their money. But why didn't you compete with them? Isn't that a good question? I mean, if you came from the tech industry like I did, that would have been your first impulse. It's like, oh my God, these guys are making all this money doing something somewhat like what we do. Why don't we just do what they do and make the money? Why ask them for money? You know, there's no power in asking them for the money, right? I mean, if they give you money, why are they giving you the money? Because they want you to write nice things about them. Because they want you to stop saying that they're the devil incarnate. I mean, it's kind of obvious. You know, and where are the ethics of journalism in all this? You know, a year ago, the switch flipped in journalism, and all of a sudden, Facebook went from being the cute, cuddly baby squirrel, right? I mean, we have this phrase in the tech industry called the baby squirrels. And every so often, there's a company that comes along that we call the baby squirrels because everybody loves them because they're so cute and adorable and cuddly and all the rest of it. So Mark Zuckerberg used to be like the ultimate baby squirrel while he was like stealing your industry from you. And you know what it was? I'll answer the question and then we'll go. The thing they did that you guys still won't do is they created a level playing field. They let everybody contribute to the news. They didn't have, I can write articles on Facebook and nobody stops me from doing it. There's no barrier to entry there. That's why they get the money. And if journalism wants the money, it's not going to come with no strings attached from Facebook. It's going to come with the most odious strings imaginable. It's going to remove all of your objectivity, all of your independence is going to go down the drain with that. So the only way we get, and you know, I'm sorry, one more thing I have to say, is that the assumption journalism makes is that the only people who care about journalism are journalists. And that is so wrong. You know, I've only for a tiny bit of my career have done anything remotely like journalism, and I care deeply about journalism. When you guys go over my head and you go make the deal with Facebook, I go, well, Jay and I used to do a podcast. We called it Rebooting the News. We've got to reboot the news. We've got to do it without you if you won't do it yourselves. Okay.
Okay.
Speech over. Sorry.
The Cube.
Hi, Nikki Usher here. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your insights about the early history that at least I was definitely not paying attention to. So thank you so much for coming here. I was wondering if it would be possible for you to reflect a little bit on the access to privilege that you had to be successful in the context of the early tech industry. You mentioned a level playing field on Facebook, and just because everybody can be heard does not mean that everybody can be listened to.
Oh.
So I was wondering if you could maybe reflect a little bit on the advantages that you've had to put you in the position you are today to be speaking with us.
Oh, sure.
And before you answer that, you know that picture we had up at the beginning? Could we put that back up? That would be great.
Why do we want the picture up?
Because I'm going to refer to it eventually.
It's a great picture, by the way.
Yeah, because it relates a little bit.
Of course, I had a lot of advantages. I mean, there's no doubt. I understand where the question's coming from. I believe I do. And I come from a family that had a tremendous value on education. My parents both had PhDs. Sorry?
That's privilege.
Yeah, I'm also the first.
Your grandparents were refugees, too.
My parents were refugees. I'm a first-generation American. So they fled for their lives. My parents were children when they fled for their lives. So, I don't know. I mean, there were a lot of disadvantages that came from that. I mean, I don't want to go into all the psychology of it, but being raised by refugees is not necessarily an advantage, okay? But on the other hand, you know, yeah, of course, I have privilege. I have my family had money, but when they arrived in the United States, they didn't have any money. I didn't volunteer this. You asked the question, right?
I guess the question is, if you have privilege, are you supposed to just be really apologetic about it and not use it, or are you supposed to use it?
Well, also,
That's not the question.
what's the question?
The question is just to reflect on it.
Well, I think I have been reflecting on it.
There's no value judgment implied.
Right.
It's just, what does it mean to be a white dude moving to
Well, yeah, I know. Okay, great. Well, you know what? Okay, you could have this conversation, of course, with any white dude, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay, good. When I started blogging, I mean, I'm going to ask you a question, right? When I started blogging, nobody was blogging. There were no barriers to entry. Would it have made a difference that I was a woman or a person of color? Hard to imagine that it would have made a difference. I mean,
Probably would.
oh, okay. Well, I don't think, okay.
So,
You seem very certain about that, but I am afraid I'm not that.
let's, before we get too far down this road, let's.
Wait a second. Why me? You know, how many other
Yeah.
white dudes were up here?
So
you know,
Dave's a white
why
dude.
me? Maybe because I'm confident and because I have strong opinions.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what you object to,
So-
right?
so Dave-
should I just be quiet and
Yeah,
be
so
respectful?
Dave's a white dude, and he was a white dude who was able to do this thing. And I think we can have a real conversation about had he not been a white dude and had he
But I didn't
some
keep
other
it for
profile.
myself. I developed this
But-
stuff so everybody could have a voice.
Yeah. Now, maybe, you know, there's
Whatever.
a lot of, you know, the privilege of people who run Facebook, for example, or run any number of tech companies is, I think, contributing to a lot of the problems, which is why I'm kind of bringing up this picture again. This is, you want to describe this picture?
Sure. Well, why don't you? Because
But-
I will.
but-
I'm sorry.
but-
I was going to say something snarky. I'm actually kind of offended by the
No,
whole
let's
thread. But
let's talk. I'm trying to shift the thread into somewhere that we don't just get into an argument about white dudes, because I'm not interested in that argument.
not really either.
But describe this picture for a minute.
Okay. So my family was part of the desegregation of New York City in the 1960s. So that picture is the woman wearing the scarf is my mom. The little kid holding her hand is my little brother. He's 60 years old now, by the way. And what they're doing, I'm not sure why this is in response to this, but I'll tell the story anyway.
Because we're talking about diversity.
Okay, fair
so-
enough. Oh, that's actually true. So what are they doing? We lived in a white neighborhood called Jackson Heights in Queens, in New York City. And they had a court order in New York City at the time to desegregate the schools. So my school, my elementary school, was paired with a school in the adjacent black neighborhood. And half the kids in my school went to their school, and half the kids in their school went to mine. So that's my mom walking my brother to the black neighborhood. This was on the front page of the New York Times, by the way. It was an incredible picture. And as you can see, there's a black mother walking her children to the white school. So whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of conversations going on about tech and media and privilege. We have 5 minutes left?
Oh,
Jesus.
God.
Tech and media
We have a
and
lot more to cover.
privilege
Can we-
and who has a voice and all kinds of things.
There's one big idea that I want to be sure we talk about.
Okay, you do that.
Which is that when I watch journalism cover tech topics, it's appalling to me how wrong they get it. So an example would be Hillary's emails during the 2016 election. This was a major issue started by the New York Times. It became, it's quite possible it determined the outcome of the election. And I don't know what the issue was. I read all the articles that I could get my hands on, and they never answered the question, what is the issue here? So, and then last year it was Facebook. And the question, the first, in the 2016, the issue was, what is an email server? And I don't think a lot of reporters understood what an email server was. So the idea that she had an email server sounded insidious. It sounded terrible. I felt this because I desperately did not want Donald Trump to be president of the United States. Last year, it was Facebook and their APIs. Again, I read all the articles to get my hands on. I couldn't find the issue. And so the suggestion I have for the journalism, and specifically this part of it, the academic part of it, is run some boot camps. When the issue comes up, at the moment it comes up, on the technology, for reporters. It's a collaboration between the journalism school and the computer science department, or, I think that's basically it. And do it in an immediate response as the news is actually happening. And that's it. You don't need me to do it. Anybody could do this. But it's about time that journalism took some responsibility. Okay, you all don't have computer science degrees, but you can get the story right, and you can head off these issues in advance.
So I'm going to be obnoxious because we started late, so I'm going to demand an extra 5 minutes.
Okay.
And because it wasn't our fault that we started late. Because, yeah.
If you were the New York Times leader, what would you do?
Oh, I happen to have an answer to that question. Maybe we could get that one.
I think you wrote about this.
I wrote about it, yeah.
Because I know that you have an answer, so.
I know. I'm a little bit disheartened and a little bit sort of, I don't know what the right word is. What I would do is I would compete with Facebook. It was what I was saying before. And it was a proposal that I made to the New York Times in 2002. I had gotten leaked to me the XML files that they were using to syndicate their content to other news organizations. And I thought it was so great that I just repurposed it as RSS and published it and got shut down. And then I ended up in a meeting with the CEO of the New York Times Digital, Martin Niesenholtz, and I proposed two ideas. One is, give me the feeds, which they did. And that, by the way, is why RSS came out of the tech industry and became a juggernaut in the journalism industry. And the other one was, give a blog to every source that you quote. And I believe if they had done that in 2002, there would not be a Facebook today. And the idea simply is to open up journalism to the people. And yeah, it's going to create some problems, no doubt. And you deal with the problems. But there is a whole, I don't know, I mean, I wrote a whole blog post about it, quite detailed. And it would be hard to recite the whole blog post in a talk here, but if there's any way I can communicate that, I would be glad to do that.
Final question, and then I'm going to have one more question. Great. Great.
Have some help in the middle.
Thanks. I wanted to just ask you about the reboot of the news. I work for a small, entirely donor-funded investigative unit in South Africa. We're quite lucky that we have donors who are willing to fund us. Do you see the reboot of the news as something that will only sort of happen within the context of journalism moving to a donor-funded model, or could you see a reboot happening within the traditional commercial model of journalism?
What was the first part? You said, I didn't, there's a dichotomy there.
Basically, should journalism be funded by philanthropy, or is there a commercial?
I just mean in terms of the reboot of the news.
I know, I got that
reboot
part,
that
I
you're
understood
talking
that part. No, I'm far more radical than that, actually.
Is there a commercial model?
I actually think we ought to hedge against there being no commercial model for news. I know this is very hard for journalism people to contemplate, but as I said earlier, there are those of us who are not in journalism that want to have journalism even if the business model for journalism fails. So one of the things, so I don't accept either of those. That's not how I see news rebooting. I think the things we ought to be doing now is we ought to be teaching journalism to everybody who wants to learn journalism. And I think that we should come to see journalism not only as a way for somebody to earn a paycheck, but also as a civic responsibility. For those of us who have the impulse to do it, there should be a way to do it. So I think, for example, if you get a degree from the University of Texas, you should take a semester of journalism.
Yes.
I know, this is how we connected, me and Rosenthal. No, I mean, this is seriously a very exciting idea, and I don't know why we don't do it. Yeah, and that, everybody talks about news literacy, but I don't know a better way to learn how something works than to actually do it yourself. And then should journalism fail, at least we'll have some knowledge of how to recognize journalism when our society reboots it. I mean, think about a world without journalism. I mean, that's like a world without civilization. So at that point, we're going to be rebooting not just the news, we're going to be rebooting humanity. It's that big a question. So I think we ought to be preparing, we ought to be hedging. Thank you.
Yeah. And also,
Wow, I'm surprised. I told Rosenthal you all were going to lynch me if I said stuff like this. He promised me you wouldn't, so
we're in this
you
together,
have a good leader.
right?
Yes. I think we
one
are.
One of the other big criticisms of Facebook, just to touch back on that, is that it's amplifying hate, that it's amplifying bigotry, that it's amplifying just, extremism. And from what you're saying, there had been an opportunity to build models that would amplify other citizen voices, and that didn't happen because the model that Facebook is, because of the targeted advertising model and lots of other reasons, it's designed to amplify certain types of speech, whereas there had been an opportunity to curate and amplify citizen voices representing, other points of view that might not be as viral, but more chance to lift those up, and that didn't happen.
Absolutely. I mean, an example, I mean, I can't, nobody listens. I mean, my blog is not very well read. It used to be, not anymore. And when all this stuff was happening with Facebook, it was about a year ago earlier this week, because Facebook shows me the things I wrote a year ago, which is actually kind of a nice feature Facebook has. I wrote a very comprehensive piece about what we know about what Facebook does. Nobody read it. I mean, it got no exposure. And yet, how many miles of news articles were written that had no information in it about what Facebook was about? So that's my frustration. I don't have any privilege here. Nobody's listening to me. But why can't those? I'm a good source when it comes to this stuff. I actually am. I do know. I've actually programmed to their APIs, and that was the issue last year. Was let us all learn about APIs. It's a great thing that people got curious about it. It's a terrible thing that the news industry didn't rise to the opportunity to actually teach us about APIs.
Or notice what was happening quite a long time ago.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So we're getting the wrap up signal.
I'm okay with wrapping
up. And I know that I've demanded more time and we've gotten it. So I thank Rosenthal for that. But I want to end on one note, which is you told me yesterday what your grandparents warned you about.
Oh, yeah.
And I think this is sort of a reminder why we all have to work together.
No kidding. Yeah.
So tell us.
Well, as I said, my parents were children. They fled the Nazis. It was a complicated situation because my grandmother on my mother's side was a Lutheran. She was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed. She fit in Nazi Germany, and she married a Jew, my grandfather. My grandfather was deported very early in the process when they were just deporting Jews. They weren't exterminating them. And so she had to sneak out of the country to get to the United States because they weren't letting Germans leave the country. And on the other side, on my father's side, they left from Romania, and my grandfather told me a story about how they were crossing a frozen river and they were being shot at from both sides of the river. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, so they came out really scarred from this experience. But both of especially my paternal grandfather, felt it was very important to pass on to me and my brother what he had learned. And he was absolutely sure this was going to happen in the United States. And he told me, this is what you have to watch for. And every one of the things he told me, every one of those things, we've tripped over those wires long ago. We're demonizing people based on race. It's not just stopping at race, it's going to religion. He was so prophetic. He used words that we made fun of him for: plutocracy, oligarchs, all this kind of stuff. Yeah, well, we all use those words now. He told me that when this starts happening, David, you need to get up on the roof with a gun and start shooting them. This is what he said. And he meant it. So, yeah, the thing is, we have to work together. And so many people are still thinking about their careers and how to get ahead, and that the world is just somehow going to straighten all this stuff out on its own. And that was another thing he warned me about, is people are going to do that. And we have to work together. That's a plea, and I don't expect it, well, I hope it happens. Let's just leave it at that as a final note.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we have our next panel that is ready. So I would call Nick. Nick, can you come and introduce yourself and then introduce your panel, please?
Hello, good morning. Welcome to our panel on the impact of artificial intelligence and machine learning on journalism. It's great to see the diehards who are up early on Saturday morning. I'm Nick Diakopoulos. I'll be your moderator / host for the next hour and a bit. We'll be discussing sort of everything AI and journalism, all kinds of interesting challenges and questions for us to get into on this panel. Whether it's machine learning techniques that help moderate online content, which we'll hear about this morning, or software that writes sports and finance articles automatically, which we'll hear about from another panelist this morning. I think there are some really fascinating and really kind of thorny questions for us to get into today. Things like, what does AI mean for jobs in the news industry? How do journalists need to think about quality and accuracy of news content when it's being produced with AI and automation? And what are the interesting sort of ethical questions that come up as journalists integrate these technologies into their practices? So I'm going to be joined by a fantastic panel of experts today, including Lisa Gibbs, the Director of News Partnerships at the Associated Press. Among other things, she works with industry leaders and emerging startups to identify smart applications of automation and AI at the AP. I'm also joined by Clay Eltsroth as a product manager from Bloomberg, one of the companies that's really gone all in on automation. Clay is helping to develop machine learning and speech-to-text solutions for the Bloomberg newsroom. We'll also have Ling Jiang, a senior data scientist with the Washington Post, where she works on data mining and knowledge discovery from large volumes of data. And then finally, we have Michael Morrissey, the chief executive of Muckrock, where he oversees the development of several different technological tools used by journalists, including things like Document Cloud, FOIA Machine, O-Transcribe, and Quackbot. So just a note on the format. I know we started a little bit late, so I guess we'll have a shorter break in the middle. Each of us will speak for 7 to 10 minutes. We'll introduce ourselves, describe our work, our role, our projects as they relate to AI and automation. Then we'll kind of get into tackling some of those big questions that I mentioned earlier. And of course, we'll leave some time at the end for QA with that, with the microphone cube. All right, so I'm going to kick things off and just tell you a little bit about myself and the kind of work that I do in this space. So again, I'm Nick Diakopoulos. I'm a professor of communication studies and computer science at Northwestern University. I direct a research lab there called the Computational Journalism Lab, where we study, design, and build all kinds of computational, algorithmic, and automated production and dissemination tools for news information. I've spent the better part of the last couple of years actually working on a book on these topics. It'll be out in a couple of months. I hope you check it out. It's called Automating the News: How Algorithms Are Rewriting the Media. But for today, I kind of want to put a little bit of a kibosh on some of the AI hype that tends to circulate in the news media. I think when we talk about AI in journalism, really what we should be talking about is human-centered AI in journalism. And in particular, I want to talk about three things that relate to human-centered AI. One is I want to talk about human values in technology and journalistic values in AI technology. Secondly, I want to talk about how humans and algorithms are increasingly hybridized or blended together in new news routines that incorporate AI. And then I want to talk about how I think practitioners and scholars should really be adopting methods and approaches from human-computer interaction when they're studying AI. Okay, so first, this idea of values in technology. So this shouldn't be surprising. All technologies, including especially AI technologies, embed and encode human values. These values reflect choices like what data was used to train the machine, how that data was defined and sampled, how algorithms are parameterized and configured, how the defaults are chosen, what inputs a system pays attention to, what inputs a system doesn't pay attention to, what's quantified, what's not quantified. All of these are human decisions that play into how an AI system is designed. Artificial intelligence systems are tools at the end of the day. They're built by people to serve human needs and goals and values. And that makes them fundamentally political tools as well. They express the values that designers and developers choose to build into them. I think this suggests a real opportunity for journalists and news organizations to become aware of and start exercising their ability to include their own professional ideological values, institutional values, into these technologies that are then, of course, driving news production and dissemination. If it's not going to be journalistic values going into these AI technologies, it'll be values from non-editorial stakeholders, values from platform companies, and so on. I think it's time for us to start thinking about AI as a new medium, actually. A medium in which journalists can express and exercise their ethical and normative values, their professional values, through the code that they implement. So I would call on journalists to kind of step up and really start being AI designers if they want to own the future of news media. So to my second point, hybridization, it's sort of a pattern in the evolution of media. Every wave of new technology, whether that's telephony, photography, the copy machine, digitization, all of these technologies somehow change the nature of roles and tasks and workflows in the newsroom. AI is no different than any of these other technologies. It's also a technology that's going to change news work. It will often complement, but rarely entirely substitute for a journalist. Some economists have estimated that only about 15% of a reporter's job and only 9% of an editor's job could be automated using current technology, current AI technology. Humans still have an edge over non-Hollywood AI in two key areas that I think are essential to journalism. Complex communication is the first one, and then expert thinking is the second one. So reporting, listening, responding, pushing back, negotiating with sources, and then having the creativity to compellingly put that all together, or knowing when a new angle of attack is needed. AI can't do any of this stuff. This is what we would call complex communication. But of course, these are indispensable tasks to producing journalism. So although AI can often augment human work to make it more efficient or more high quality, more often than not, I think we're finding AI technologies actually create new types of work. They create new tasks like configuring, parameterizing, knowledge management, data production, template writing. These are all new tasks that are coming online as a result of using these new technologies. So the future of AI in journalism has a lot of people around, but I think there's also a lot of research still to be done to study the new and changing news work that AI creates when blended into journalism practice. Now, my final point is that, whether we're talking about values in design or the evolution of hybrid workflows, it's clear to me that the future of AI in journalism really has to be human-centered. I think to study this hybrid future, scholars should be drawing on methods and approaches from the almost 40-year-old field of human-computer interaction, HCI. For instance, value-sensitive design approaches, which have been around for dozens of years, will enable the deliberate design and operation of AI systems within the value frameworks of journalism. And methods like task analysis, which have been around for 30-plus years, will help decompose high-level tasks into automatable subtasks that can be blended with human effort. There are all kinds of new, I think, and exciting questions that can be tackled using these types of HCI approaches. So just think about, how should interfaces be designed to empower editors to edit at scale when an AI has just generated thousands of stories? Or how can human agency be maintained in these types of systems so that people can direct AI and uphold journalistic quality standards? And how will end users ultimately come to interact with algorithmically imbued news media and AI agents? Again, I would argue that pursuing all of these types of questions will benefit from further collaboration with scholars and practitioners in the field of HCI. Something I'm happy to say we're already starting to make happen. The first HCI in journalism workshop will actually take place next month in Scotland. So I'm going to stop there, but I'm looking forward to hearing from our panelists, and then we'll jump into some of those exciting discussion questions. Next up, we have Lisa Gibbs from the AP.
Okay, great. All right, thanks. Thanks. All right, so to set the stage for some of the big questions that Nick referred to, I'm going to walk through some of the projects that AP has undergone with regards to automation and AI. When we first started automating company earnings stories back in 2014, we were one of the first news organizations. There was a handful of us that were experimenting with these technologies. Today, there are news organizations all over the world. Dozens and dozens of examples of newsrooms that are using automation to make story production more efficient, or algorithms to help us surface interesting patterns in data. And so this is really becoming more and more of a routine tool in newsrooms. So I just want to point out the use of the word augmented, which you'll hear a lot, and you heard anyone who was in the Microsoft session this morning also heard. We absolutely believe, as Nick was saying, that this technology is going to help journalists do their jobs better if executed properly, of course. It's not going to replace the work of journalists. Yeah, so just again, when we think about how we are going to use these technologies, we look for a few key criteria. Is this going to remove routine tasks from the work of journalists so that they can do more creative and high-impact work? Are these tools going to help us break news faster or find news in areas that we haven't searched before? Can it allow us to produce content that will enable us to reach new audiences or new markets? And at AP in particular, we have kind of a side benefit that not all newsrooms have, which is we have chosen as our strategy to identify startups with expertise in things like machine learning and linguistics to work with. And that brings new skills and energy into our newsroom and helps us innovate faster. Probably, as we'll discuss later, other newsrooms hire data scientists and their own and build things in-house. We have pretty much chosen not to do that. So when you think about how to apply these technologies, break down what we do: news gathering, news production, and news distribution. As a large global news agency, I'm really going to focus on the first two aspects of this. And I'm going to talk first actually about the second part of the process, news production, because that's where AP started in this, and it's where we're best known. Whoops. So the fundamental problem, we are great at identifying stories and writing them, but how do we do that at scale? How many stories can one journalist write, and how many would we want them to write? So for especially routine things like sports stories or earnings stories, are there ways to scale production of those that save time? And so in 2014, this was the project that really kind of put us on the map with this. I was business editor at the time, which is how I fell into this whole world. I had editors and reporters that for 1 month every earnings season, so quarterly, I mean, pretty much all work stopped and everybody focused on producing, cramming, jamming out the earnings stories. And what I often say is my reporters and editors felt like robots doing this work quarter after quarter, and it wasn't incredibly exciting. So we looked at how can we make this a more efficient process. We worked with a data vendor, we worked with a software vendor called Automated Insights, and we wrote templates to automatically generate those stories. And as you can see on the slide, we're now automating approximately 3,700 earnings stories each quarter, most of the US stock market. I'll mention that what we were able to do, that project was viewed as so successful in terms of freeing up our journalists' time. I mean, as business editor, I was able to reassign reporters to cover technology, personal finance, more breaking news. I can draw a direct line between automating earnings and the number of investigative stories my business department produced. So it had real impact on the quality of journalism that AP was able to produce out of its business department. Just real quickly, sports has been a real growth area for us. The demand for sports previews and recaps because of fantasy and sports betting has only grown, and we're able to serve these needs more efficiently through text automation. This year, 2019, I should say by the end of the year, we will be producing 40,000 automatically generated stories. Now that sounds like a lot, but remember, AP, Global News Agency, we produce about 1,000 stories a day. So even though 40,000 sounds like a large number, it's still a very small number in the context of what we do. Other news outlets are doing a lot with automating election results, things like home prices, anything really that has very structured data can be automated. One of the more interesting projects that we're working on now, and I should have a slide on this, but I do not, we are working to see if AP can't use its automation skills combined with local data, state and city level data, to help local news outlets create more content that's relevant for their news audiences. Many of these smaller news organizations don't have in-house automation expertise. And so we're working on a project right now with the Newsday Media Group and Columbia University data science students testing around education data in the state of New York to see how can we work together to help local news outlets use automation to serve their audiences. And that's a project right now that we're really excited about. Another project we're really excited about, it's one thing to produce thousands of stories about, basic, home prices or earnings, but we're using natural language processing to create summaries of all AP stories. And what this summarizer does is it takes a story that was written for, your basic digital platforms as we all would write them. We write in past tense, we use quotes, we do all of the things that journalists do, and it creates a 2 to 3 line summary that's in present tense, no quotes, and is meant to be spoken. For us, this is important because those summaries go to broadcasters and radio customers, as well as Amazon Alexa and other voice devices. So there's a business case for us to use this kind of summarization, but we are really excited about it because it's kind of our first experiment with how to use natural language processing, and we think that it's the beginning of our foray into versioning. Can we use NLP to create different storytelling approaches that may serve audiences in different ways? So this is something that is a real big experiment for us, and we're really interested in how it turns out. You know, there are other ways, of course, that newsrooms are automating production. I mean, video transcription, which you heard about in the Microsoft session this morning, is a big example. There's a machine learning assist to it in that when you're correcting video transcripts, the machine learns from its mistakes and gets better and better. So that's another big time savings tool that we use, and many others. But I want to move, because I'm worried about my time, 2 minutes. I do want to talk about news gathering, which is just a really incredibly exciting area. So event detection, I mean, that's the fancy word for, scanning the sea of social media out there and detecting what of all these posts is likely to be a newsworthy event. So we just finished a 5-week test. This tool is from a company called SAM, and we were looking to see, can this tool help us break news faster? And it did. Over the course of the 5-week test, we had 27 testers. Only 10 responded to a survey, so I've got to go crack the whip. But those 10 identified 50 instances where SAM told us about the news event before our editors knew about it. Imagine the power of being able to find out about the Aurora workplace shooting or the fire in Brazil, even 10 minutes or more, before others, before you would have otherwise. And so, how these algorithms can help us identify news happening in our communities is just a fabulous area of exploration. I don't think I have a slide on it, but I do want to mention its cousin, which is insight detection. And there are companies like Curzana, and their CEO is here in this room somewhere, and others, Cortigo out of MIT Media Lab, that are really interested in exploring how to use social listening technology to help us detect insights, particularly in underserved communities or underserved areas where, so that we're not just getting our news from the people who are the loudest on social media. And we've worked with both those companies to play around with how do our beat journalists who are covering immigration along the border or State House News in Illinois or whatever that might be, well, how can they use algorithms to see what people are talking about in their communities around these topics? So I think this whole area is really promising and a fascinating one right now. The last thing I'll talk about, I swear, Rosenthal, authentication. Now, we happen to be building a tool called AP Verify that helps us identify video that is factual and authentic. And kind of how this works. So the system will allow us to paste the URL, and it'll use machine learning to go through all of these processes that help speed the process of UGC verification. So it'll go out there and search on the internet to find, hey, has this video showed up before? Maybe it was 2 years ago, maybe it showed up as something else. That gives us a flag that this is not what it's meant to be. So I think the use of verification and that sort of thing are also really powerful uses. What else do I have here? All right. I'll leave you with this final word. Bad data, bad story. LA Times QuakeBot tweeted that there was a 6.8 earthquake in Isla Vista. It happened in 1925. And 1984 on Lifetime said, tell him not to be too hard on himself. We all make mistakes. Thank you.
All right, well, I'm Clay Elstroff. I'm a product manager at Bloomberg News. And for some reason, I always end up, good, okay. I end up going after Lisa, and I can basically say, yeah, we do the same thing, but that would be just too simple to come up and do that. But a little bit about my journey into the product manager role. So I started off as an editor at Bloomberg. I learned very quickly that our clients care a lot about the money they invest in the news that we produce. I had a really bad run-in with some of our clients, and that all happened based on a headline that I sent out based on a company called Sino-Forest. If you're familiar with Muddy Waters Research and Carson Block, that was the very first story that they had ever done. And I got a lot of phone calls within, I think, milliseconds telling me a lot of bad things about myself that I didn't know. And what that led to was the newsroom lawyer sitting next to me for the rest of the time I was an editor, which was also good because every single interview that I had someone next to me to audit my questions and answers that I got from them in real time via email, which wasn't fun either. But that led to me starting a team within Bloomberg where we monitored for breaking news across all third-party content, including Twitter. And at the time, no one else was really doing it to the extent that we were. And I went to being managing editor. I helped roll out TikTok. And then I had a great opportunity to come into a product manager role where I would help integrate AI, machine learning, and speech to text in the newsroom. So I hopped at that opportunity. It's been less than a year. We've done a lot, and usually you hear about what we do at Bloomberg. We hear the 2,700 journalists and analysts that we have, but what you don't necessarily hear is we have 5,000 engineers that work with us. And that kind of falls into a happy medium between more engineers than news organizations have, but significantly less engineers than big companies like Facebook or Microsoft or Google have. And do all those engineers work on news? No, but they help gather data, make the processes easier for our clients who use the terminal, and also for us. So getting to automation, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to become a product manager. Automation, one of the byproducts of automation is a lot of content. And thanks to that, it's great. You get a lot of coverage on things that you normally wouldn't, quicker, faster, better, but you also get a lot of volume. And also with social media, you get even more. So people are just inundated all the time with that, and that's a big problem within news. So you've probably read the New York Times article on automation and what Bloomberg is doing. We use a tool called Cyborg to process thousands of data points in seconds and send out headlines and generate stories. That's really cool. We used to have people that did that. They transitioned into roles where they're capturing the data, they're QCing the data, and they're also looking through the press releases because automation is not perfect, at least not yet for a lot of things. And with the AI products that we've been developing, I talk to a lot of journalists, I sit down, I explain it to them, and once I take them through the entire process, they get it and they go, wow, how does that happen? Like, how does this model work so well? So I tell them that basically the secret is, as we go through and we train the model, during a brief period of time, we'll go to the server, we'll say, hey, look, if you don't get this right, we're going to replace you with a human. Now, I always tell that joke whenever I'm presenting things, and a lot of people find it funny, but then there's always some where it's like, oh gosh, computers are going to replace me, but that's not really the case. I think that, like they've pointed out before, Nick and Lisa, reporter roles are kind of transitioning. You can leverage data to make things quicker, faster, better, and I think that's very unique compared to when I first started as a reporter. Things are so much easier to do. Trying to sift through massive amounts of data would take weeks sometimes, and now it can just take a couple of seconds thanks to AI. So at Bloomberg, what we've been looking at is how can we best use AI, and that's to basically benefit the reporters and the people that are writing content and producing content. And it all boils down to one thing, is what can you scale? And for us, if you're, in the past, you were a reporter, you would hop on a conference call, you would take notes, you would try to rewind, but most of the time there's no place to rewind during the conference call, and you'd wait on a replay that would show up 2 days later. So the quotes that you would get and things like that didn't really work well. So we started transcribing these, still involved one reporter, one call. We tried reporters being on 2 calls at once, headphone in each ear. That did not work out well. So what we're looking at now is like how can we best utilize machine learning to bridge that gap? There are thousands of companies that report earnings. We don't have thousands of reporters to listen to all of those calls. So what we are looking at is we can transcribe those calls, and obviously the next step, which I guess anybody would be doing, is can we leverage machine learning to detect things that occur on those particular conference calls? So yeah, I mean, it's something that I know that our clients do. There was an FT article earlier this week about that. I think a lot of our competitors are probably doing the same thing. It's very interesting. One of the biggest things that we're doing at Bloomberg right now is we're going through and educating the reporters on what AI and machine learning is. And I think that if we look at all the things AI and machine learning can do, getting the reporters and the journalists on our side to help us do that is probably one of the biggest challenges for me right now. Because everyone's worried about the job. They think that the way they do things is very unique and they do it a certain way. So I think the education around AI and machine learning is probably one of the biggest things I think for newsrooms going forward. And I think that's pretty much it on my end. I'm really looking forward to the panel actually and getting a lot of questions from folks. So thank you.
My name is Ling Jiang. So I'm a data scientist at the Washington Post. So today I'd like to talk about how we leverage AI in the newsroom at the Post. So we built lots of data-driven products using machine learning techniques to assist the journalists. We do heard lots of positive feedbacks about how machine learning makes things more efficient and effective, but we do also face lots of challenges. So the biggest concern is that the reliability of the machine learning tools. The fact is that machine makes mistakes. Well, human does too, but machine cannot correct itself without human intervention. If we use a robot moderator to review online comments, can it always make the right decisions? Obviously, the answer is no, because there is no perfect model that will be always 100% accurate in the real world. But what are the possible consequences if those machine learning tools making mistakes in the productions? Actually, it depends on the use case. For example, take the robot moderator as an example again. So mistakenly approving a comment is not good because we want to maintain a civil conversation in our comment section. But mistakenly deleting a comment is much worse. We don't want to push our commenters away by removing their comments for no good reasons. But some other systems, like, for example, a headliner generation system, will have a much higher tolerance for mistakes because the human will make the final decision before taking any actions. Last but not least, just like many others in industries that start using AI, journalists may wonder if AI is the threat to their jobs. So next, I will talk about two use cases at the Post and discuss how we deal with those concerns. At the Post, we have about 2 million comments per month. So commenters are really critical to us because they are engaged and loyal users. But the challenge is that some of the comments are really hateful. And if we left the comment section untended, the trolls will crowd out thoughtful discussions. But the question is, manual moderation is very expensive and actually infeasible at such massive scale. So the result is that some news organization is shrinking their comment section or even outsourcing to other platforms. But to the Post, reader engagement is too critical to curtail or outsource. So we turn to the AI, and the Modbot is how we automatically moderate the user-generated content. So Modbot works by giving every comment a score between 0 and 1. So the closer to 1 means Modbot is more confident in deleting the comments, and closer to 0 means Modbot is more confident in approving the comments. So we can see we have two common example comments here. Comment A is really bad. So Modbot gives a score close to 1, and for another good comment B here, it gets a very low score. So the challenge of deploying a system like Modbot is we need to develop trust with the users. In the production, we use threshold to automatic moderate comments with Modbot. So for example, here we use 0.8 and 0.1 for thresholds. So everything above 0.8 will be automatically deleted, and everything below 0.1 will be automatically approved, and every comment left between will need human review. So in this case, Modbot is pretty accurate in the prediction, but there is still a big chunk in the middle section that require manual process. So we can adjust the threshold by changing to 0.7 and 0.2, but in this case, we might introduce errors. So we give our comments moderation team the ability to control the thresholds of when to trust Modbot versus when to require human moderation. So they can change the threshold in order to decrease the amount of manual process as they gain trust with the system. So as I mentioned before, mistakenly deleting a comment can be much worse. So they can choose to be more conservative in the deletion and to avoid potential risks. So we can see that the post moderation team used to spend most of the time reviewing comments based on some online discussion policies. So with Modbot taking care of the raw work, they can now have more time to focus on more complicated work, such as featuring high quality comments or interacting with the users. So we can see that Modbot is actually more assisting people instead of replacing them, because most machine learning tools are trained based on historical data. So they are actually mimic what human did in the past and repeat the patterns. So they can never replicate the creative part of the human jobs. And with Modbot, our readers can have more space to express their thoughts in the healthy comment section, and our journalists can have more time now to engage with the readers. So all these changes can be very beneficial for growing community and improving the reader engagement. Another example is the article popularity prediction tool. So we have over 1,000 pieces of news content every day, but not all of the article will be equally popular. So we need a strategy for editors to prioritize the rising articles so they can enrich the content to increase the reading quality. Basically, the system considers 4 different types of features for articles, like metadata feature, including article type, section, contextual feature, like sentiment, readability of the text, temporal feature, like the first view since publication, and the social feature, like in the 30 minutes tweet volume, and so on. So we built a regression model trying to predict the page view of the articles in next 24 hours after publication, because by its nature, the lifespan of an article is very short. So it is more interesting and valuable to predict an article's early popularity instead of the long-term popularity. So if the system says an article will receive over 100K views in 24 hours, we will push it out to a Slack channel. So the newsroom then can allocate resource to improve the quality or enrich the content by adding images, videos, or contextual links. And actually, a system like this has a much higher tolerance for mistakes, because the editors will add their own judgment to the prediction before they decide to whether invest the resource to the articles. So with this popularity prediction tool, we can prioritize the rising articles and optimize the resource allocation. In this case, our editors can put more effort into increasing the content quality so we can serve better reading experience to the broader audience. And also from the business point of view, we can support advertising opportunities. So we can see that the AI tools really increase the efficiency of our work. Because they can tend to the simple and the repetitive works, so free journalists to focus on the high value work. And it also gives us the capability of deal with some tasks at a very massive scale, which can be actually impossible with pure manual effort. And the journalists can also have better communication between their peers and with the audience, and that's increase the reader engagement. So one last thing I want to say is technology is neutral. The key is how we use it. And with appropriate strategic or quality control and human intervention, we can make the best out of the AI tools. Thank you.
Is it okay if I stand behind here? Is that going to mess things up? Great. Hi, I'm Michael Morrissey. I'm the founder of Muckrock Foundation. We now run a variety of websites, as we were talking about earlier. Our big ones are Muckrock, which helps people file, track, and share public records requests throughout the United States. We also run Document Cloud, which thousands of newsrooms use to host, analyze, and share their documents with their readers. We also run OTranscribe, which helps with transcription, FOIA Machine, which is sort of a self-tracking public records tool. We also run a Quackbot, which is a Slack chatbot that helps with common newsroom tasks. And then we just launched our 6th service, which helps manage your account across various different services. We got less creative with naming things, so we just called it Accounts. But overall, we work with about 2,000 newsrooms and about 100,000 users, primarily journalists in those newsrooms, and we reach about 20 million people across sort of through our newsroom users. And so we've been really working on some really exciting technology and sort of been trying to figure out sort of what's the next big thing when it comes to helping our users sort of understand their world and then present that information to our users. And so the exciting technology I want to talk about most today is something new called PDFs. And so can I get a quick show of hands? Has anybody's newsroom used large piles of PDFs or gone through large sets of documents? Okay, great. Keep those hands up for the next 7 minutes because I want to follow up with you afterwards. And also, who's had challenges going through those large sets of documents? Who's ever had to? Okay, great. I was hoping that nobody would raise their hands and I could just sit down and we could save that time for later. But we pretty much all we do is go through government documents, many in the form of PDFs, many in the form of emails. We've helped file through Muckrock 60,000 public records requests so far, and on Document Cloud we host 100 million pages of primary source materials on behalf of our users. So we have a lot to kind of go through. And so we first started getting interested in machine learning because of Muckrock. So when you file 60,000 requests, not only does that mean you have 60,000 items to kind of go through, but you actually have hundreds of thousands of emails with various government agencies that all need to be tracked and categorized. With Muckrock, what we like to do is kind of take as much of the drudgery of the public records request process from journalists so they can focus on their reporting, and that means we take on that drudgery. And so that means going through hundreds of thousands of emails like that, being like, hey, I'm still working on this request, it's going to take more time. We need to go through and manually classify all of that information. And there's one of 8 possible cases that each classification can be. Some of them are very simple like this, some of them are a little more complex. And on average, they took about 8 minutes per each on average. So this one might take a minute, another one might take 10 minutes as you kind of decipher the bureaucraties. And, but overall, it was taking about 8 minutes per task. So if you total that up, I think we had 336,000
different of these communications to kind of go through. They take about 8 minutes each. That's about 24 years of somebody working on this full time, which wouldn't be too bad, except at the time we only had 3 staffers, and we had 0 staffers who were interested in working on this full time. So we decided to look for a better way. So what we did was we built a microtask system. There's got to be a better name for this stuff, but we built a microtask system similar to like Mechanical Turk, except only for internal use, to kind of streamline that process and make it easier to kind of go through, tag this stuff. We had some of our staff members who would say, you know what, this is kind of soothing. I've got something on Netflix. I'm doing some categorization work. Life is good. And this actually cut down the time on the task. Just this alone cut down the task time 50%, and also made it really easy to sort of onboard new people. So if we had an intern who had some extra hours, we could have them working on this with just a few hours of training. It really kind of smoothed out the process. So now we've gone from 24 years of task categorization time to just 12 years, which is still more than we had people, but we're going in the right direction. But if anybody's experienced with machine learning, you can kind of tell that sort of in the back of our minds, the goal of this sort of more precise tagging was so that we could automate this process going forward. So you can see, okay, we've now got everything in a nice database. We've now got everything sort of categorized. We now make it so that we can have lots of people kind of digging into this information and make it look a little smoother. So after roughly 100,000 categorizations, so that's a lot of back-end categorization work, but eventually we got a model that was working about 80% of the time. Which was actually really exciting. And when our lead developer was like, all right, I've got 80% accuracy, I'm like, great, now we've limited 80% of the work, everything will be good, I can just do this over breakfast once a day and we'll be all set. But it turns out if you are wrong when you follow up with a user 1 out of 5 times, that user's not going to trust you very much. If our news articles, 1 out of 5 of them was just completely wrong, people probably wouldn't come back to our news organizations, or maybe they would these days. But we wanted to do sort of a better experience for our users. And so we put a very high degree of sort of certainty with that model to kind of make sure that we were giving them really good results. And so now the automation takes care of about 30%. And so now we've gotten down to just about 8 years worth of work, and we've been around for 9 years. So we can split this work among staffers, and it's not anybody's favorite part of the day, but it's also something that's manageable within the organization. Plus, having some manual review means that we occasionally get to kind of stumble across interesting redactions and sort of fascinating bits that we might not otherwise see, such as this wonderful photo of an FBI holiday party that we had a manual person go through and see. So what we've found is that sort of as you're building out sort of machine learning process, especially because we are a very small team, having good fallbacks is really important. We're not going to get to a point where we're going to have 50% of this done or 80% or 100% of this done anytime soon through automation, but having 30% of the work taken off our staffers' hands means not only our staffers get to work on other items, but it also means that those users, when we can automate it, they're getting a much faster response because the machine can run 24 hours a day. So even late at night, if an agency comes back with information, it gets categorized more quickly, and so everybody ends up benefiting a lot. So what did we learn from this process? First of all, that data cleaning can take a lot longer than we sort of expected. I think if I had known what we were getting into when we first started, I think I might have tried to choose something else a little bit less daunting, but I'm glad we didn't actually know what we were getting into. I think one of the things that's different about us than some of the other great organizations today is that we had no machine learning expertise on staff when we started, and I think if we had known better, then we would have given up. But then I think one of the other things is sort of how key communication is, right? So I think this is communication with staff and trying to make sure they understand how this machine learning works so they can identify problems. This means communicating with your users so that they understand sort of when things go wrong, they have a little more context to understand why that is, and they can provide more useful feedback, and they're also a lot more sympathetic. If somebody just sees something weird and they don't know, they get really concerned. If you give them that context, it can be a lot more helpful. And then also, it's really important to kind of communicate to your end users who are journalists, because journalists are very busy, newsrooms are very busy, and essentially newsrooms have been lied to and said, hey, this technology is a silver bullet, this business model is a silver bullet, this is going to save you, so trust us and we're going to kind of go through with this. And I think journalists feel really burned, and so they have a very low tolerance for sort of spending a lot of time investing in technology up front if it's not going to work. And then the other thing we've discovered is if you make something that's supposed to be bureaucrat-proof, they're just going to build a better bureaucrat who's going to find some ways to work around it. So that means it's really important to have fallbacks. For example, we had agencies just start sending us letters that said, see attached, and then they would include an un-OCR'd PDF attachment that include the actual information. Really hard for the computer to kind of guess what might be in that PDF. So we did see a lot of success with this, though, and I think it did help us kind of bring down the amount of sort of manual work by about 66% overall. And so when we merged with Document Cloud last year, we were really interested sort of what could we do to kind of bring these kind of techniques, build this pipeline out for everybody. And so what we did is we launched sort of this crowdsourcing tool that with a drag and drop sort of builder, anybody can sort of say, hey, these are the documents I have, these are the questions I have about them, let me know how to go through them. And so it's been in a private beta, but we've already had 14,000 responses from over 1,000 users. One thing I hear a lot about is people don't want to see how the sausage is made. People find sort of government documents really boring. It turns out there's a lot of nerds who are really, really into government documents. And so that's been really exciting to see that we're not quite as lonely as we thought we were. But also this means that we can kind of roll out these tools to newsrooms so that if you have a large set of documents and you need to kind of go through and turn those documents into data, we now have a really nice pipeline even before we add on some of the machine learning work coming later. And it's not just a way to analyze these documents, but it's also a way to kind of engage your readers in sort of building these models, training these models, and turning documents into data. One thing we found is that readers really like feeling like they're putting in work and investing in understanding this material, and having them go through this material with your newsroom is a really great way to do that. And then so moving forward, though, we've also found some new techniques that'll mean instead of hundreds of thousands of sort of data entries, we can start getting journalists and people who are investigating documents feedback much more quickly about sort of, hey, this stuff is, we're going to be able to sort of help you start categorizing this information. And if you have 100,000 letters from an agency to various constituencies and you want to find the letters about a certain topic, only giving it a few dozen examples with 20 minutes of work, you can start putting those into different buckets so that you can sort of focus your analysis more completely. But one of the things we're most excited with going forward is the ability to sort of help newsrooms kind of share what they've learned and let them build off each other's machine learning projects. So we want to make it so that you've done a successful investigation, you publish your methodology, and then somebody can quickly relaunch that going forward. So thank you so much.
Now we have about 25 minutes or so to talk about the big questions. So invite our panelists up here. No, you can grab a seat.
I think you have to stand, Nick.
No, he should. I got one.
Make Clay stand.
This works. So I kind of want to dive right into what I think is often a frame that gets brought up. I'm good, thanks. Often a frame that gets brought up with respect to AI in the news is, aren't these systems going to take jobs away from journalists? I think we heard plenty of examples today from you all about how that might not be the case. But I wanted to pose it as a question to you all now. Are you hiring or firing? Are jobs going away? Are we creating new jobs?
Why don't we decide to get away from that framing, Nick?
Well, tell us about the jobs that are being created.
And as you were saying earlier, I mean, it's really very much, and you made a very good point, like it's about the intention. I mean, we're looking to make journalists' jobs easier, and instead of having them do essentially stenography work or the clerical work of transcribing a video or that sort of thing, we want our journalists out interviewing people and thinking and digging through documents and all of that kind of stuff. But to the point, I do think certainly the importance of data literacy. I mean, it's never been more important, and it does create new jobs for data management and things of that nature. But I mean, we absolutely have, it's been about shifting jobs rather than eliminating them.
Yeah, Nick, and I'll once again echo what Lisa is saying. And Bloomberg is hiring. The jobs that people used to do were very repetitive, sending headlines, and now we can have computers do that. So their jobs are evolving and transitioning into new roles that are coming up that are more valuable within the newsroom, as opposed to things that computers can do now.
So let's talk about that transition a little bit. I mean, what kind of skills do journalists need to learn in order to work with these new tools and technologies?
Well, I think for the most part, we've seen a lot of people say, well, oh, you need to code and you need to do a lot of other things. But I think the big thing they need to have an understanding of is just what coding is, what Python is, what data is, how you can use it, how are models created, and what can AI and machine learning do and what can't it do. So that if they can pick up on things where a model can be created, then they can help us with that process, as opposed to kind of like, going against it. And if there are things that the machine learning models can't do, then they know that's where they need to put more time and effort into. So I think that the biggest thing is, like I mentioned before, is just educating people on what's out there as far as machine learning and AI goes, and just what it can do.
Yeah, I'd just say, and I think going back to the problem, is this going to create or end jobs? And I think one of the things is that if we use this to just kind of reduce the work, that, who knows what the effect will be. But I think AI has an opportunity to kind of help news organizations rebuild moats and sort of rebuild defensible assets for themselves, where if you have a machine that's able to uniquely do earnings calls better and more quickly than anybody else, that's going to be something that's going to make those jobs more secure, because it's going to be harder for other people to take them out. And I think for the skills that really work well for journalists, I think there's a lot of programming jobs, a lot of AI expertise, which is really helpful. But I also think sort of having journalists who are able to sort of think through systematically, hey, I don't want to just tell one story. I want to find a way to tell this category of story again and again in new and exciting ways. And I think that's a really hard skill for people to learn, sort of thinking, I'm not just going to report on this one baseball game. I want to sort of tackle a way to report on every baseball game. And I think that kind of system thinking is a really valuable skill when tackling this stuff.
So what other kinds of work pop up in terms of being able to participate in the development of these systems? I mean, are we talking about entirely new jobs cropping up? Are we talking about pieces of jobs that are evolving? I mean, what do the tasks look like for working with these tools?
Yeah, I would say it's pieces of jobs. Example always uses that we're dependent on our clients looking at very specific events that occur. So, for example, refinery outages aren't necessarily the coolest thing out there to talk about, but our clients really need to know when one of those occurs. So going to a data scientist or a machine learning expert doesn't necessarily solve that problem, because they don't have the expertise around that event. So that's where a lot of this is transitioning, is taking the expertise and knowledge from the newsroom and applying that to models.
Great. I kind of wanted to, so Lisa, you were talking about a couple of projects, the one with SAM, which I guess is an external tool that you're evaluating, and then AP Verify, which is an internally developed tool. Can you talk a little bit about the decision to use an external tool versus build an internal tool? And then Ling, also, you're developing internal tools. Maybe you can also speak to this question of internal versus external.
Well, when we decide whether to use internal or external tools, it depends on do we have in-house data? We definitely want to make the best out of use out of the data we have, and by developing insiding tools, actually we can better understand our needs. When we use external tools, the problem is that we need to communicate with them a lot of times for them to understand our needs. But if we basically, for most of the cases, we prefer building internal tools, because we can go to the newsroom and talk to them and understand what they really need, and they can also come to us when they have any potential use cases. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so far, and I made reference to this earlier, we've just adopted a strategy that we would prefer to find the expertise outside the newsroom, where we certainly do not have the expertise. And we've just found that working with particularly startups, occasionally universities, we can build or modify tools that work for us, and that's just, we feel like it's been a faster way to test things. And in the case specifically of AP often then invests in those companies. So that's kind of a, an underpinning of why we do it that way. We actually are an investor in SAM, and our head of strategy sits on their board. But now, of course, we invest in these companies only after we've done a project with them and know that the technology works. But we've found that that approach enables us to be more nimble, and we don't have to, because newsrooms ask me all the time, we don't have a big technology budget, we don't have any R&D budget, we don't have a big tools budget, what do we do? And I think, well, we don't either, relatively speaking, and so we have identified this playbook for working with startups to do this.
But we have been seeing a lot of the AI that's coming out in journalism is from bigger organizations. I mean, what's the role of smaller newsrooms in this domain? Can they play?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. And I think one of the things we've been thinking a lot about, so like even now we're 7 total people, 2 developers who we do now have some internal AI expertise, machine learning expertise. So that's a lot better than we were a few years ago. But I think look for sort of your relative strengths, right? I think you cannot compete, if you're a small organization, you can't compete with the Bloombergs, the Washington Post, the APs of the world, and you definitely can't compete with the Googles and the Facebooks of the world. But what you can do is bring a lot of unique value to your community. If you go out and sort of talk to people and say, hey, what are the data challenges you have? Because for the most part, the Facebooks and Googles of the world are not going to your community meetings. They're not talking to your local housing advocates. And so there can be a lot of really rich opportunities to build connections with your community. And I think that's one of the things we've been doing, is going to a lot of community groups, sort of saying, hey, what are some of the challenges you have? What are the questions you have? Show us the processes you look at when you look at housing equity, when you look at other areas. And then there's huge opportunities, even without a lot of technical expertise. Just paying attention and bringing what you have to those communities can build a lot of value and trust.
And I'll just add real quickly, there are smaller newsrooms all over the world who are using these technologies, and even small newsrooms can identify startups at the local university to work with them on developing some of the systems. And I mean, one of the things, there is nothing more glamorous right now than metadata and the archive. Now, every newsroom here has an archive, whether it's text, photo, video, whatever it is. Now replace that word archive with the term training data. That is valuable. What you have is valuable, even if you're a small newsroom. And so I think it's not necessarily just about having a big budget for these things. It's about thinking strategically about how, what are the problems you want to solve and how can you do that?
So I think we have some time to open it up to audience questions. Yes.
They are.
Oops.
Almost.
Hi, Julio Sanchez, Prodigioso Volcan, Mexico. This is a question for Lynn. You work with art publishing, right, at the Post? These tools that you talked about, like the Modbot, are they included in the art publishing CMS?
Yeah, most of them are in the art publishing suite.
Okay, that was basically the question. Thank you.
Any other questions? One here, Angela, and then Jay here. Yeah.
One kind of threat to journalism through machine learning and AI is deepfake video, which is using machine learning and AI to stitch images onto other people's faces in video, or put another person's voice into a video. And I was curious about, is AP Verify meant to be your response? Can you talk a little about what the AP sees as the threat from deepfake and what you're doing about it?
So AP Verify, at least right now, is meant to be a tool to identify accurate video posted on social media related to news events, and then verifying them. Right now, the functionality is not there's no deep fake detector right now that's built into that. We are concerned, obviously, about the potential of this, are monitoring and in talks with a lot of different companies that are coming up with solutions. We don't think we're there yet. I mean, a true deep fake, the common proliferation of deep fakes is still a ways out there. I mean, as an example, we've been talking with a group of interesting neurologists who have used the study of micro-expressions in their treatment of spinal cord injury, patients with spinal cord injuries. And there's been some discussion about using that expertise to develop a tool that can study people's micro-expressions to verify. And so, can we get to a point where we've kind of got, trusted face watermarks or trusted face sort of technologies so we're talking and exploring all of these things, but not yet now developing a tool to address that.
So one of the threats from machine learning, this is sort of the deep fake issue, is an external threat. But I kind of also wanted to reflect back on sort of the internal threats that might be posed by using machine learning in the newsroom. Ling, you talked a little bit about some of the quality issues that might crop up. Do you want to comment further on that? How does the Post think about maintaining quality when they're using machine learning?
Well, so if we talk about the accuracy of the models, it's not realistic to if we require the model to be 100% accurate. So we need to have another layer of quality control that involving human intervention. So that's why we use the threshold to control Mobot, because we can throw out a model and just say we can use the 0.5 at the cut point. We can achieve over 80% accuracy with that. But what about the other 20%? We can push our commenters away. So that's why we need to be very careful about how we use them. So even if we can, from the technical side, we can improve the model and improve the accuracy to, let's say, 90%, but what about the other 10%? So it's always important to have the quality control and how we use them on a strategical level.
Sounds like there's a whole bunch of interesting editorial questions emerging there about how do we edit machine learning models. But we have a question up here. Okay.
Yeah, this is a question for Clay. Do you watch the Showtime series Billions?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So I watch it too. And it's very obvious with that show that Axe Capital, this hedge fund, is very much driven by news. And things pop up in the news, and they are obviously of importance to the traders, and they hop on it. And very often, Axe, the main character, has his own sources of news. So my question is, the most exciting thing that I heard about in this presentation was using AI to find things that are happening that could be news. Is it your perception that the very rich companies like hedge funds and investment banks and the other companies that are clients of Bloomberg have themselves their own systems for scanning large amounts of data and finding those weak signals that might tell you that something's happening that's newsworthy? In other words, is the industry already in possession of these tools and journalists have to create their own? Or are they trying to create the same systems that you're trying to create? Like, who's ahead here, the hedge funds or the newsrooms?
Well, you really got me on the spot there. So what I would say is that it's kind of like the issue we all deal with spam. It's as good as your inbox is, eventually the spam will hop ahead and you'll get a couple of those. And the same thing goes with what you're describing, within journalism and Bloomberg and our clients, they'll jump ahead, we'll jump ahead as far as, who's better at finding these particular events. But a lot of these funds are quant funds, and that's what they do. They create models to detect things that they can trade off of. And that's been going on for a long time. And as more things are becoming machine readable, the more signals and the more opportunity that they have, but also the more opportunity that we have too. So I think that while they are out there trying to do the same things that we are, they're not able to think of everything that we do, and they're not able to have the same sources that journalists do. So I think there is kind of we're both running in the same direction, but we're not necessarily running on the same road. I think that's a good way to kind of look at it. But yes, I mean, that is a great show, and they are definitely using signals to try and pick up things, but it's been going on for a long, long time.
I have a question over here from Elf.
Thank you for a very rich discussion. So I'm going to play the devil's advocate because I do sense a little bit of techno-utopianism here that reminds me of panels at ISOJ around blogging and social media, and I've been just as guilty of that as anybody else. So I want to ask you something. What's your worst dark forest prediction for AI crushing the news?
Whoa.
Facebook.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the Facebook recommendation algorithm and the way that it tunes into different signals from users and how that algorithm amplifies perhaps some of the worst things about human psychology.
I think the biggest danger is around algorithm-driven distribution, which of course we haven't, talked about here. It's been more about the practical application. But even within that, the slide Rosenthal refused to let me get to was about the risks. I mean, we don't, we're not here, it is about intent. You have very excellent organizations sitting up here who have, our standards editor was very heavily involved in our projects around AI to ensure that our news values and principles, were being followed along with this. Well, like not every organization is going to have that. But this does raise so many interesting issues. I mean, we just completed, as I said, this test around event detection. And I think, one thing that's really important to talk about is, what happens when journalists start relying too much on tools like this to detect the news. Well, is Twitter, Snap and YouTube really the place where we want to start relying on, detecting the news? And, we need to make sure that we're intentionally still going out and walking the neighborhoods and doing all those things that the human journalists are able to do. And by the way, this is not a new dilemma. I mean, when people ask, why is there so much crime news? Well, it's because it's public record and it's easier to send a journalist to get those police reports than to walk the neighborhood. So these issues aren't new, but the AI technology magnifies it and speeds it up. And so we have to be very conscious, of course, of these ethical questions and really make sure that we are intentionally developing our strategy to reflect that.
Just to, once again, add on to what Lisa said, I think it's a combination of the platforms, the technology, and us. We're moving towards models where people have to pay money to see quality news. And if you look at that, what happens to the minorities and countries that don't have access to that? They have to go to the platforms to get their news for free or to see what their friends are saying about something. And I think that that's a good way to look at things, is that I think we also have to be able to make quality news that we're producing, available for everyone out there, not just a select few people or parts of the world.
I think we had one other question.
Question where?
A question over here.
Whoa.
Maybe the last question.
Yes.
This question is actually for Clay. I wanted to know about the audio experience that you're providing for your audience and what you think the future of audio in journalism could be for publications like Bloomberg and others.
So I deal more with the newsroom as far as the product externally with Bloomberg and audio. I think that's a completely different team. I'm happy to speak about that. But internally within the newsroom, right now everyone knows that they record everything that they do, all the interviews, and being able to transcribe those, I think, is a really big benefit now. More people are asking about that, wanting to do it, and it also allows them to include more content in the stories they write, better content. So I think there's definitely a big place for that within every newsroom. The other thing is to I mean, transcribe everything. Once you turn something into text, then you can run that text through a model and you can figure things out a lot better and a lot faster. As far as monetizing voice, I think there's a lot to figure out there. You know, you perform a search on Google, there's advertising. You do a search on Alexa, there's an answer. You don't know where that answer came from half the time, most of the time. I'm not just picking on Alexa and just in general. And you don't know not only where it came from, but there's no monetization around that. You go to like get your weather on the Weather Channel, there's advertising there, there's rationale behind why people would do that, and you know exactly where it came from. I asked Siri this morning what the weather was going to be. So I could take one of those cool scooters they have laying literally everywhere around the city here, and it just told me what the weather was. I don't know where it came from, you know, and I think that's one of the big issues that I think all these big major organizations are going to have to tackle is the monetization and the transparency around the answers and that they're giving to questions.
All right, thank you very much. This was a great panel. We're going to have a brief coffee break, very, very brief, and then we're going to come here for the Saving Local News in the U.S. And I want to thank our sponsors, Knight Foundation, Chorus by Vox Media, the Dallas Morning News, Facebook Journalism Project, Google News Initiative, Luminate, Microsoft News, Open Society, and Univision. Yay! All right, so a brief coffee break. Thank you. that's it's time to start one of the most important panels of this conference, because I think the local news problem, let's put it this way, it's really very serious. I have local news before they come up. A female left this at the bathroom. It's a car key. You know, this kind of local, very local, useful, practical news. So if the person... What's that? First floor. It was in the first floor bathroom. So if you see someone crazy, it's going to be in the... I mean, crazy looking for this. You say it's in the desk, in the reception desk. So how can I introduce Jennifer Preston? Jennifer Preston is awesome. She came to this conference 10 years ago when she was the first social media editor of the New York Times, and she, it seems that sincerely loved this conference. And 9 years ago, okay, accuracy, 9 years ago. And she really loved the conference. And since then, even before she became the powerful vice president of Knight Foundation for Journalism, she was a fan of the conference and a supporter who was helping me to put this together. So Jennifer will introduce the panel. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. And as Rebecca did in her opening remarks, I'd like to begin with a thank you and ask all of you to join me in thanking Rosenthal for 20 years of bringing together journalists, technologists, and scholars to address the problem of journalism. Thank you. Thank you. So after I joined Knight Foundation almost 5 years ago, Alberto Ibargüen, the CEO and president of Knight Foundation and former publisher of the Miami Herald, asked me to travel around the country, asked me to talk to publishers and editors and the entrepreneurs who were creating new models for journalism, such as The Voice of San Diego and Evan Smith right here in Austin at the Texas Tribune. So Alberto thought that it was time that Knight Foundation went back to its roots. Knight Foundation was started by Jack and Jim Knight, two brothers who owned and operated 26 newspapers around the country. And this was right after the Innovation Report had been published at the New York Times, which broke open a lot of doors that needed to be busted open to bring the transformation that we're all seeing now at the New York Times and so many national news organizations and international news organizations that can scale. However, that same success that we're seeing at the national and international level, we are not seeing across the country in a consistent way. However, what we are seeing are very promising signs. And you're going to hear today from a group of people who are really driving transformational change, who are bringing new ways of storytelling, but most importantly, new ways to make journalism, the business, sustainable. So a few weeks ago, Knight Foundation announced that we are going to be doubling our commitment to journalism with a focus on supporting local news. That amounts to almost $300 million over the next 5 years. And so we're really thrilled. We announced some very important initial investments to Report for America, to the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, which that investment includes adding $10 million more to their endowment that supports local legal assistance for journalists so that there will not be journalists who will be unable to produce outstanding accountability reporting and investigative reporting because they don't have a lawyer for anything ranging from pre-publication review or to challenge that FOIA request. So we're also made investments in ProPublica to support more local investigative reporting. And we have investments coming that will address the very big problem that we continue to have in this country, and that is the lack of diversity in our newsrooms, a lack of focus and commitment to build trust and to serve underserved communities. But today, what I'm really excited to share with you, and then for the discussion, just some real pioneers, people who are making a difference. And so we're going to first hear from Jim Brady. Jim Brady needs no introduction to anyone in this room. Ryan Nave, who's the editor-in-chief of Mississippi Today. Tasneem Raja, who has a really exciting story to tell you from Tyler, Texas, and John Thornton, who is the co-founder with Elizabeth Green of Chalkbeat, and what I think is the most exciting, promising pathway for local news, and that is the American Journalism Project. So let me please introduce you, turn this over to Jim Brady.
Good morning, and I think this is my 15th Rosenthal-apalooza, so I'm very proud to be one of the probably top 10 in terms of attendees of this conference over 20 years. It's very hard to say no to, as you all know. So I'm here at an interesting time. We are in the midst of, this is what Spirited Media was. This is what Spirited Media is today, which is instead of owning 3 sites, we now own 1 site, and this is what it'll be in about 72 hours. Owning 0 local news sites. So we sold, so with that context, I think like one of the reasons I thought at the timing was interesting and why I wasn't sure I wanted to do it was like, what's my opinion on where we are in local as a guy who is now trying to get out of the daily local publishing business? And my answer is, damn right we can still make this work. I will tell you, and I'll explain a little bit about why we're selling and what the reasons were and some of the mistakes that led to the fact that we were in that position. So a little bit of context. I should tell you, by the way, that we sold them to really good local brands. So it showed that we did a lot right. We built value in these 3 sites that we created, and we were able to turn them over to very happy, great stewards. I know. I keep turning around looking up here when I can look there. But so anyway, this is where we sold Denver to Colorado Public Radio. We sold The Incline to Where By Us, a startup that you guys probably all know that has sites in many cities, Miami, Seattle, Portland. And we're going to sell Billy Penn, but I can't say to who yet. So why am I still bullish on this after all this? Why is the guy getting out? I'll tell you why. Part of the reason we got out was we weren't able to raise the money we needed to raise to get us to where we needed to be from a profitability standpoint. This round fell a little short. The funding environment out there is pretty tough if you're a for-profit, which we were, by the way, in case you didn't know that. So you're out there trying to raise money in a for-profit environment from companies that are going through their own struggles at the moment. And we just weren't able to get the capital we needed. But part of the reason that we were in that position is we made some mistakes. And one of them was we launched membership at least a year too late, maybe a year and a half too late. Membership is a huge boon for us. It brought our burn down 75% last year, but we still needed a little bit more time, which we didn't have the funding to get to, hence us moving to selling. But we saw enough in what we learned over the last 5 years doing this that I want to share some of those things. So yes, I'm a believer. I'm still sure that we can make this work, but I want to start, before I get to how I think we do it, have to start with a couple of caveats, I think. Caveat 1, the days of 100-person local newsrooms are largely over. It doesn't mean that there aren't places where somebody is going to be able to, a local funder a local billionaire will decide they want to have a really robust local newsroom. But I think for the most part, the large newsrooms are pretty much over. That doesn't mean in a lot of these cities you can't have 10 10-person newsrooms or 5 20-person newsrooms or 50 2-person newsrooms. I think as we niche off a little bit, there might be sites that cover sports, some that cover entertainment, some that cover government, some that cover something else. And then those break into niches, which in some ways are more fungible from a financial standpoint because you have very specific people who might buy advertising or be willing to give you money. But the big newsroom, I think we have to acknowledge, is largely over. The days of competition driving action need to end. One of my big takeaways from this, and this was something we did from day one, and I think we were absolutely right about, is we almost were never the 10th person standing at a press conference, or the 5th person standing at a press conference, or the 3rd person standing at a press conference. We have such a dearth of local coverage around the U.S. right now that the idea that we want to have 7 news organizations in the same town, each sending multiple people to cover the same press conference, to me is insane. Because somewhere in there are 15 stories that are not being told by anybody. And so what we need to do is start working together. And in Philadelphia, Billy Penn, one of our 3 sites, was one of the 19 sites that was involved in this project called Broken Philly, where we just covered poverty in Philadelphia, and all 19 sites were worked together. We actually had meetings with 19 news organizations where almost no profanity was thrown at anybody else. Imagine how hard this is. You know, we generally have not worked together very well, but we have to work together now because we have to look at coverage of an area as something we're trying to cover collectively, not just by ourselves, because we're not going to have enough people to do that. But all that said, the road ahead is still very treacherous. We don't know what's going to happen with the economy. We don't know what's going to happen with funding, whether that's nonprofit funding, whether it's foundation funding or for-profit publishing, or funding. So the road's treacherous. We don't have room for a lot of mistakes. I think we have to be very, very, like to my point about not launching membership early enough. That alone may have been the mistake that put us in a position where selling was our best option. And so we've got to be very precise about the decisions we make and commit to them, and then commit to unmaking them if they're the bad decisions. And I think we still move too slowly as an industry to do that. And then the last one is the newsroom cultural changes. After 25 years of working in digital news, I'm still frustrated by how often you run into people in the newsroom who don't want to change their habits and don't want to change their schedule and don't want to change the way they do things. And that obviously, if that continues on, I think the first 3 things on the slide are sort of moot. I think we'll be in it'll be fatal for us if we don't embrace this a little bit more. Now, obviously, we were doing digital-only startups, and we didn't have to worry so much about some of the kind of older legacy challenges that other people in the room have, but still, the cultural changes have to happen. So, but it can be done. So with all those caveats aside, here's sort of my 10 bullet points, which I'll give you a little bit of context in each of them. So for me, don't just be don't be in the community, be of it. I think one of the real struggles we've had for a long time is we write like we don't live in the places we're writing about. How often do you read a story in a newspaper and feel like the person who wrote it could have written it from anywhere on earth, right? If you live in Austin, you should write like you know Austin and you have a familiarity with it. And I think we don't do that yet. We do it. We did it at the sites we're in, and I think there's a lot of startups that have embraced the idea that we have to be of this community, not just in it. But I still think in the legacy side of things, there's still a little bit of a sense of we want to be kind of on the side reporting, but not really involved in it. And I think that's a fatal mistake for some of the reasons I'm going to get into shortly here. 2, focus on the consumer always and in all ways. And that doesn't mean, it means a lot of things, right? It means some of the obvious stuff. Use Hearken to gather questions that you can answer, you have your newsroom answer. There's lots of tools you can use, commenting tools, to get people involved in what it is that you do, but it's not just that. It's also understanding that you actually have to deliver to where they are, which is delivering to mobile devices. We don't even think, when we think about serving the consumer, we sometimes think about providing information that's useful to them. Is this working? Am I getting into this? All right. Keep changing. All right. Perfect. So, but there's also user experience, right? We still treat the user like we want you. Now it's falling apart. All right. Is it? I've been in tech. Somehow the mic is still a mystery to me. So it's about serving consumers where they are. It's about serving them fairly by providing user experiences that are not abusive, which they are borderline abusive in a lot of cases. Because, again, we're going to need these consumers to basically fund us down the road. And so stop worrying about how much you can monetize a single visit and start figuring out how you can get people to just have lots of visits and monetize them a little bit less on every visit. Build a long-term relationship with them. And so it's focusing them in all ways. It's not just involving them in the process. 3, have a point of view and communicate it. And this one is always controversial because people think that means a political point of view. It does not mean a political point of view necessarily, although it can. What it means is you just have a point of view for what your site is about. So for Billy Penn, In Philly, it was really Philadelphia is a wild, crazy, flawed, wonderful city, and we all want it to be better. How do we go about doing that? We don't go into it with the idea that everybody's going to agree on exactly what that is, but we all agree that that's the goal. The goal is a better city, and we all acknowledge the weirdness of this place at times. And I think you have to be clear about what you're about. It can't just be you come here to find out what happened yesterday. In my opinion, it's got to be more than that. It's got to be much more connected as a sense of place. 4, value. I think you got to produce journalism of value, not of quantity. I think we got into this volume game, which was, and I don't know that, we all probably got into it to some extent. I never was in it as much as I think others had to be in it, which is you have to produce a lot of stuff. If I make more journalism every day, the math works better. I think we've proven at this point, based on what's happening with economics of journalism, that's not the answer. Writing 3 really well-reported stories a day about the community is going to get you more audience and more loyalty down the road than rewriting 20 pieces other people in town wrote on a given day. You've got to have your own voice. You've got to be able to find the white space in the coverage in your area, and you've got to do those stories. But this is not a quantity game, local journalism. Maybe it's at a national level where you're trying to generate enough ad revenue. That's the way to go. But it's not at a local level. You've got to have a sense of place. Metrics. Don't do impressions or page views. I know that that's a hard argument to make for people who are fully based in the ad model, and maybe you can't get out of that particular cycle of hell. But if you cannot do page views as your core metric, that is a wonderful way to go through life, I will tell you, because we never made page views the core metric because we were always based on making money on events and making money on membership. So for us, it was the loyalty of the reader that led to revenue, not the quantity of the page views. And to me, a page view spike is like an ice cream sundae. It's a kind of thing that you should be able to see and go like, that's a treat. But if your entire diet is page view spikes, it's a really crappy diet. And it's as we all know from the chasing page views, it's a very unreliable diet. And so if you can focus on getting important stories in front of the right people and having them share it, that will lead to page views, but don't focus on page views as a primary thing. 6, be different. We're in a city that has, keep Austin weird. Don't just be informative. Be surprising. Be essential. Be fun. We stink at fun. In general, in journalism, we stink at fun. It's like sometimes just have fun. Like every year in Pittsburgh on Valentine's Day, we did Pittsburgh-themed Valentine's Day cards. One of them was just, "You are my sunshine because there is none," right? But this gives you a sense of place, like the city you're in, and you can be fun. And yes, you can also do good journalism, but you can also show that you're a human being who has lots of facets, and you can be fun. So 7, don't cover national. You cannot win that. Own your own backyard. If you're a local startup and you ever have national stuff on your site, I would love to know why you think that's a good thing to do. Yes, if Donald Trump comes to your town and you want to report about a national figure coming to town, that's fine. But writing about national and international news on the site, if you can avoid it, I think is a bad way to go. If you came to any of our sites, you got all local news all the time, period. Remain small, but try to act big. One of the compliments we got a lot for Billy Penn was when we would tell people it was a newsroom of 4, they'd say, "You only have 4 people? It feels like you have 15, right? That's what I want. Because there's a lot of newsrooms I've been involved in where we had 15 and it felt like 4, right? So use strong curation. Link people to stuff that's interesting in your community, whether you wrote it or not. And just link to it. Don't rewrite it. Be indispensable. Have a good morning newsletter. Have a strong social game. 9, build loyalty and passion and monetize that. If you do the first 8 in this, you start to have an audience that feels connected to what you do and wants to help you survive, right? And you have to be clear with them that you need them to help you survive. So focus on loyalty and passion as a business model if you can do that, because down the road it's a lot more sustainable than an unpredictable ad model. And then 10, which circles back to number 1, don't just be of the people, be with the people. We threw about 75 events last year across our 3 sites. We mingle with thousands of people a year that read our sites, and that also makes them feel more connected. So one of the keys, so really focus on being with them and not reporting from the side. And that's it for me.
Awesome. All right, so Mississippi Today was founded 3 years ago as a solution to the problem of our capital, like a lot of state houses around the country, of becoming a news desert. But we knew as the new kids on the block, we didn't want to be an alternative source of news. We wanted to figure out what role can we play in supporting legacy media and existing media, but also make people feel like they're getting something special from Mississippi Today that they can only get from Mississippi Today, and also create spaces for others in the ecosystem. And what we decided to do was to focus on filling in coverage gaps. So we don't compete head to head with the daily newspaper or other competitors. Out of the gate, we doubled the number of reporters who are covering the Mississippi Capitol full-time. We have 5 reporters who are there full-time on a given session day. And on any session day in particular, all of our reporters may be in and out of the building, flooding the zones. I mean, we wanted to cover the hell out of legislative committees that weren't getting coverage anymore. We wanted to cover agencies that weren't getting coverage anymore. And not just the big sexy ones like the Departments of Health and Education and Corrections. You know, we wanted to cover the Mississippi Public Service Commission, which regulates utilities in our state. We wanted to cover the Mississippi Transportation Commission, which is making decisions about infrastructure funding, and obscure agencies like the Office of State Aid Road Construction, which it took us a while to figure out what exactly that was. But it's a very important agency that's involved in local infrastructure funding decisions. And more than anything, Mississippi Today wanted to be the place that really got at the question of why, as we say in Mississippi, are we always first in everything bad and last in everything good? We shouldn't have to brag about diversity, but I'm gonna do it. We hire people who look like people who live in our state. And not just for applause lines at conferences, but we feel strongly about the fact that you cannot cover the state with the largest African-American population in the United States, with Mississippi's unique history of slavery and Jim Crow and racial terror, with a newsroom full of white folks, or a newsroom management structure full of just old white men. And so this is something that we're really proud about, because once you drill down, right, and do data analyses, we will find stories about racial inequity in criminal justice and healthcare and education, but even on stuff like infrastructure. And I swear, like, that's not all we do, but it's a lot of what we do, because infrastructure stories are also stories about racial equity, right? There's stories about poverty, about power, who gets to make decisions for everybody in the state, and who doesn't have the power to make those decisions. And we do it all over the state. I mean, we're based in Jackson, but these are an example of some of the datelines that we filed just in the last year and a half. Jackson is covered. Jackson has a pretty reasonably robust media presence, so we don't have to spend a lot of time in Jackson. We can spend our time in Southwest Mississippi, which hardly has any statewide coverage. Up in the Delta, we have 2 Delta-based reporters on our team. Northeast Mississippi and on the coast. North Central Mississippi, and covering issues like our Choctaw community. So we understand that a lot of news organizations no longer have the resources to put reporters on the road. We are fortunate in the sense that we can. And so we want our reporters out in the field as much as possible, in communities, talking to people about what's important there. And so when we talk to our readers and our members about what they think Mississippi Today adds in terms of value, you'll see a little, some people see us as an alternative, but more than anything, what we hear is that people feel like they get something from Mississippi Today that they don't get from other media. And so what that says to me is that we're actually not being extractive. We're actually adding value to our ecosystem, and we are succeeding in creating spaces for everybody to succeed and grow and thrive. And just to talk a little bit about the work that we have ahead, I mean, we just got into the collaboration game in the past year. And our approach to collaborations is to not be particularly precious about them. I mean, we will work with anybody who wants to work with us. And so we're working with a local TV station to put together a series of investigations. Thank you, Knight Foundation. We're working with other journalism nonprofits to do stories around certain issues, in this case, education funding. And so we contributed a number of stories to this collaboration. We also contributed a number of editorial cartoons to the collaboration. Everybody ran all the stories on their site. We ran the stories on our site. And it was actually the first time that we had a story appear in the daily newspaper on A1. It was a Saturday, but we'll take it how we can get it. And then the kind of collaboration that I'm most interested in and most excited about are these little collaborations that we do. You know, I think a lot of times we think that collaborations have to be these big ass projects that take months and months of planning and produce, 10,000 word series. But what we realize is that we never go to Natchez, right? We never had any reporting out of Natchez. What was going on in Natchez? And we just got on the phone with the local editor and asked, what's an issue in Natchez that's important that you all need to do a story on, you just haven't had a chance to, right? And so their reporters made a few phone calls, reached out to their sources. Our reporters reached out to our sources, and we put together a little story in a week. And then at the end of this, we planned an event at a local brewery in Natchez where we talked about the story. We talked about people's frustrations with this infrastructure problem and with our lawmakers in Jackson, which, we have intimate knowledge of. And we talked about it over beers. And that's what we want to double down on this year. Because of our collaboration with the local TV station, other TV stations are now coming out of the woodwork saying that they want to work with us, right? And we're having conversations about how to structure those differently so that they're not competitive with each other, because TV is still fiercely competitive. We can be all kumbaya and blow up the competitive model if we want. But yeah, we want to have conversations and be deliberate about structuring collaborations in ways so that all boats rise. And so this is really where our focus is right now. Thanks.
Good morning. So I wasn't here yesterday, and I want to tell you why. This is why. Last night in Tyler, Texas, we put on a live storytelling show where we had 10 amazing storytellers who we've been working with for months tell stories that in some way, big or small, related to Tyler and East Texas's greatest challenges and greatest opportunities. You look at this lineup here, and that looks like Tyler. I don't know if I've ever seen a group of people on stage that look like Tyler. That was intentional, that was baked into our mission. I'm happy to say that we sold out this show. 300 people came to the Downtown Civic Theater in Tyler, Texas. Our audience looked a lot more like Tyler. Thank you, thank you. Our audience looked a lot more like Tyler than audiences I'm used to seeing, and I'm happy to say we made money on this deal through ticket revenue and through sponsorships, so that was really exciting. Now I'm gonna get into my real thing. And Mallory, I might need your help doing that. I've got a lot to cover, but I'm from Philadelphia, so I can talk fast. And when I got to East Texas, I learned to slow it down just a little bit. But So my name is Tasneem Raja, and I am the, do I need to, okay, great. Do I need to move that off the screen? I'm the editor-in-chief and the co-founder of the Tyler Loop. So the Tyler Loop launched in 2017. We are nonprofit, we are member supported. And this project is really different from anything I've done in my career. Before I got to Tyler, I was in Washington, D.C. as a senior editor at NPR's Code Switch. Before that, I was a senior editor at Mother Jones Magazine in San Francisco doing as a data editor. And life brought me to Tyler, family brought me to Tyler. And I have to just tell you, I'm having the most fun I've ever had in my career doing this project. So I want to talk about how the Tyler Loop is redefining what's possible in the capital of East Texas. Tyler, Texas? What is that? We are a community of 120,000, more like 250,000 during the day, because Tyler is a jobs magnet. We are booming in healthcare and education. If anybody knows anything about East Texas, they've heard of us as like an oil and gas mecca. That's not really what's happening today. Tyler is a majority minority community. It is a quarter Black, quarter Latino, half white, and our Latino population is growing incredibly quickly. Really important to understand, we are not cowboy country. We are more like a little bit of Old South, a little bit of Bayou culture, and then really just its own kind of piney woods pragmatism that I have come to really enjoy and feel at home in. So 101 launched in 2017. I started my career in alt weeklies, the Philadelphia Weekly and the Chicago Reader, so I've always brought kind of an alt weekly vibe to what I'm doing. We cover what I call policy, potential, and possibilities in the Tyler Metro. We're a nonprofit membership program, and our idea is to inform local ideas about what is possible. Because for a long time, there's just been a single story about what's possible, and we know from the conversations we have with a lot of people you don't get to hear enough from, that there are actually a lot of stories to cover. We are a staff of one, hello, and as I said, I have a national and local journo background, which really has been incredibly useful in kind of thinking about what's happening on the ground and then like what's the big picture that I can import to East Texas in a way that nobody else is really gonna do. I think of what we do as slow-baked, small-batch journalism, which means, as Jim was saying, less is more. So I'm going to talk about 5 problems that I started to notice when I got on the ground in Tyler, and then I'm going to talk about 5 solutions that we've come up with to try and address those problems, not just for our own journalism, but for our community. So, like I said, outdated perceptions about what is possible in Tyler. Idea that, you know, if you're not old guard, old money, white, you can't have a voice. The idea that Tyler, which currently is deeply segregated. As I said, we are deeply diverse, but deeply segregated. The idea that that's just how it's been, that's the way it's always going to be, and there's nothing you can do about it. So how did we try to address that problem? Through data-driven reporting on civic and demographic change. We have found that when you talk about difficult issues, starting with data just sort of helps neutralize the issue, as you know, I'm sure many of you are familiar with that concept. And so we started doing stories that just got at some of these widespread misperceptions. So for instance, is Tyler's economy really tied to oil booms and busts? So let's look at the data. We find that oil and gas is way down the list in terms of the economic drivers in our community. Tyler is getting younger. This blew people's minds. I've had 2 business owners tell me that they included this story in their business plans when they were looking for investment in businesses that were aimed at younger market, saying, you don't know this, but the data shows that Tyler is getting younger faster than almost any city in Tyler. This was like the talk of the town when we published it. And as I said, we're a majority minority city, and again, this was just like, some people sensed that this was happening, but nobody had ever really put it in numbers like this before, and this story just spread like wildfire. So, another problem. You can't talk about that here. The idea that there were topics, there were problems, there were conversations that you couldn't have in Tyler, because if you did, you would get a brick thrown through your window. You would lose your job. I mean, this place, a lot of people talk about Tyler as in a bubble, and they talk about, Tyler's kind of stuck in the 1950s in terms of social mores and, progress. Well, it just depends on who you talk to. And so we said, okay, we keep hearing you can't talk about that here. What happens if we do talk about it? The solutions: first-person storytelling. Remove myself from the equation, right? I'm a transplant. There's a very, very small Asian population in Tyler, so I just felt like, you know what, let me try to amplify other people's voices and help people just hear from their neighbors directly instead of me getting in the way. Unflinching inclusion. So when we do stories that reflect what's going on in marginalized communities, we don't do that in a way that feels apologetic, or we just go and do it. Defang the story. This is something a reader said to me. He said, you know, your stories just have this way of defanging the biting, national narratives. They just have a way of removing the poison, but they keep what's important. And that just felt so good to me. So, for instance, Out of the Loop, the storytelling show that I talked about last night, where we had stories about identity, inclusion, difference, and the audience was there for it. You felt it in the room. First-person storytelling. We did a series of profiles with undocumented East Texans where I just sat down, I turned on my recorder, I said, go. Just tell me your story. And we ran these as 3,000 word as told tos on our site. The time on page for these stories was 3.5 minutes. That was really cool to see. People were reading. Talking about issues like climate change, but doing it in a language that's going to make sense for the community that we're covering. Again, defang the issue. And finally, unflinching inclusion. We actually have the largest public high school still named for Robert E. Lee. Oh, I just lost my signal, Mallory. I'm not sure if you can help with that. Okay, great. So we still have the largest public high school in America that is named for Robert E. Lee, and this was a huge fight in our community. So we said, you know what, let's just do it. Let's just cover this. And we know this is a very, very heated issue, but we're going to do it in an unflinching manner. And we have gotten so many amazing messages from people in our community saying, you changed my mind on this issue, and that felt really good to me. And we got a grant from the Solutions Journalism Network to do this story that taught a lot of people about a community that is a lot bigger in our region than anybody realized. The Tyler Transgender Support Group has 300 members. There are 30 to 50 people who show up to their monthly meetings. This was just changing our perceptions, again, of what is possible in our community and what is already happening in our community. Another problem, as I said, deeply entrenched segregation. I mean, I have lived in Chicago, Washington, D.C., Oakland, California. I have never seen surgical segregation of the kind that I see. It is precise in Tyler. So the idea is, you don't go north of Front Street. You don't go east of Fifth Street. How do we get at this? Proactive relationships, border crossing events, and make inclusion a habit. This is a sheet of paper that resulted from my going to a community program called Getting Ahead. Getting Ahead is a national program that somebody brought to Tyler, works with under-resourced individuals to help build life skills. And I just said, hey, can I come talk to your group? And can I do this audience survey thing that I do? And then I just got everybody's number. And I said, of all the stuff we talked about, tell me what things you're interested in helping me with. So people said things like, you talked about, how can we get more diversity at community meetings? How can we get more affordable housing? I want to help with your journalism. So go, get up, go to communities and be proactive about your relationship building. We went on a taco tour of Tyler. Our taquerias are some of our fastest growing restaurants in our community, but they are mostly concentrated in one part of the city. So we said, we're just going to go on a taco tour of Tyler. Who's coming? And I thought 12 people were going to email me and say, I'll go on this weird thing you're doing. I got 100 emails. And they got it. They understood that this wasn't just about carne asada. This was about crossing borders in our community. Their emails, the language that they used reflected that. That was so exciting to me. And don't just do, when you do stories with people who don't look like the majority population in Tyler, don't just do stories about what's not working. Don't just do stories about when something goes wrong. Do stories about people who are leading successful businesses, who are just just living life, having careers. This story radically changed the makeup of my email database. You just do a story about the amazing Michael McClendon, who's this winemaker. He was actually one of our storytellers last night. And suddenly, my Facebook following, my email following, looks different. It's simple, right? Okay, problem. Oh, okay, all right. I'm gonna skip ahead just a little bit, since I need to do that. Oh, okay, all right. I'm sorry, Rosenthal, I can't do it. The people are asking. Real quick. Philly. Okay, widespread community distance or distrust of or distance from local media. So, audience-driven reporting. I have a database. Of course, I know about amazing projects like Harkin. They are informing my work here. But before I go and use a new tool, let's just start testing out me emailing people saying, ask me questions. I've got this database of 120 questions that the community has given me. And going to the Getting Ahead program is what changed the nature of my database to where now I have a lot more questions about childcare, utility assistance, rent assistance. When I get the questions, I answer them. And I do it FAQ style. And this has been just so popular. And I think it opens up collaboration possibilities with other local outlets in town. And then finally, no one was telling the deeper story. This was a big problem. Slow, small batch journalism, use the newsletter to become the destination for local news context. So how's it working? We have over 100 monthly members. We only launched the membership program a few months ago. I've published 100 stories in 2 years. I have 6,000 combined followers between all of my platforms, 2 recurring event series. Reader feedback is like heart eye emoji, like all over the place. I love what people say. I love the language that they use when they talk about what we're doing. Problem going forward, sustainability, duh. How to solve this problem? Okay, Will Tyler's seasoned philanthropists. We have a deep, deep philanthropic tradition in Tyler. But will they support the operations of a new kind of local journalism? So how do I start getting at that? I invite them to my storytelling show, right? Like, journalism isn't always a language I use. I often use words like storytelling or like, we care about Tyler, and language like that. Can a boost of national funding turbocharge our revenue building capacity? That's a big unanswered question. Can events grow memberships and sponsorships and lighten my editorial load? So can I flip it on its head to where I start with an event and a conversation instead of, I just build events and I build moderated conversations into my reporting life cycle and maybe at the beginning of my reporting life cycle. How long can I remain a quasi-volunteer? That is what I am. I am a deeply paid quasi-volunteer. And Rosenthal is saying, thank you, and I did it. Thank you.
Well, as my mentor in political fundraising used to say, well, shit. The hell are you going to follow that? I will say, my friend, I've been doing this for a long time, and nobody has ever asked me to talk more, ever. So congratulations. And the only good news about following Tasneem is I invited her. One of the oldest lines in Hollywood is never follow kids or animals. And so now we're going to add never follow Tasneem Raj on stage. It's an amazing story. And it's what gets us up in the morning right now, is there are more and more and more stories like it. Not exactly like that. But it is because we need to think about our local news institutions as fundamentally civic rather than commercial that we began the American Journalism Project. And I can't think of a more sort of emblematic enterprise than the one you're undertaking in Tyler. So we're eager to learn more. I'm going to try to go fast. I'm going to try to stay on time for three reasons. One, I learned a lot yesterday, a lot. And one of the most hopeful things I learned was just how deep and urgent the audiovisual crisis at the American Journalism Project is, which is another way of saying our slides suck. They're terrible. And so I don't know when you guys have the time to make these beautiful decks, but we don't have one, and so I'm going to try you not to subject you to them. I say hopeful, though, because we've raised $42 million in a little about 9 months with a really crappy deck. And so that must mean that we're in a moment. And we do think we're in a moment where, again, our society is coming to realize the importance of local news and that our local news institutions need to be thought of as fundamentally civic rather than commercial. Second reason I'm going to stay on time is to stay in the good graces of this guy. Rosenthal, I met with Rosenthal on September 15th of 2008, which was the day Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy. And I said, we're going to do this nonprofit thing we think we may call the Texas Tribune. And he said, I'm in. Didn't know me from Adam. There was no Evan Smith at that moment. There was nothing. I don't know what Portuguese is for I'm in, but it's the way this guy has lived his life, and you've been our champion and our conscience and our spirit animal, and I can't thank you enough. And so the third reason I'm going to try and go quickly is a lot of you have seen this before, some version of it, and so I'm going to try to focus on amplifying a couple pieces of the story that I don't think we've told as well, and then on giving you a brief update, which will not, as Jim or as Neil Chase said, will not include the announcement of our first 5 grants. So we really believe in a public service media that is sustained by, governed by, and looks like the public it serves. And we believe that standing up that at the local level is going to require a movement in journalism philanthropy. And that last part looks like the country it serves. To us is a moral imperative, but it's also a business imperative, because we really believe that in order to sustain this movement in journalism philanthropy, the thing has got to look like the public it serves. Otherwise, that movement will never be sustained. Sorry about that. The proximate objective is to raise $50 million for a first fund to stand up or help 25 or 35 what we're calling civic news organizations. We've raised, as I said, $42 million to date. The grant agreement that we signed with Jennifer and Alberto said it's a $100 million project. So we've got a long way to go. I'm not going to dwell on the problem. We've heard a lot of that. I will say there's one new take on it that come back. There's one new take on it that I heard this week that I thought was really interesting, which is even if you take the sort of squishier and leftier inclinations that I have about the importance of local news out, and you think of it just on a good government and accountability, or put a good government and accountability lens on it, think about this. 2/3 of the taxes in the United States are levied and spent within 70 square miles, which is Washington, D.C. The number of reporters covering that activity over the last decade has stayed relatively constant, arguably has gone up. The other third of taxes, though, are levied and spent in the other 3.5 million square miles in the United States. And the number of reporters covering that motion has gone down by a half, 2/3, in some places as much as 90%. Do you think there's more fiscal responsibility going on in those places? Do you think that decisions with regard to resource allocation are being made more with regard to racial, gender, social equity? Doesn't seem very likely. So what we talk about is a billion-dollar problem, and it's oversimplified, but never let that get in the way of a good story. We think that $2 billion roughly has come out of what we call news gathering spend at below the federal level over the last decade. Our friends at Facebook and Google and other places say, well, you can do more with less, and so you don't need the whole $2 billion. And so we did, we rented a supercomputer and crunched a bunch of numbers and said, fine, we'll cut it in half. So we're saying it's $1 billion a year problem. What we're trying to do is catalyze the reinjection of $1 billion a year back into local news gathering. And this is an important distinction about what we're trying to do, and it's something that we're going to have to, it's not easy to communicate. But we're not funding, or we're not proposing, we haven't done anything yet. We're not proposing to fund newsrooms. Let me say that again. We are not going to fund newsrooms because we believe that when journalism philanthropy funds newsrooms, journalism philanthropy pretty much guarantees that it's going to continue to fund newsrooms. And so what we're attempting to do, at least, is to fund integrated media organizations that have diverse revenue streams, or to help what are essentially newsrooms shaking their tin cup today become integrated media organizations with diverse revenue streams. These are the three solutions that often get proposed. Not a lot of news there. Lots of hooray about Chalkbeat in the Texas Tribune. This is, I think, really kind of the most exciting, in some ways, data we have today, which is that this is where the growth is. Nonprofit news organizations at the local level, particularly, this is where an infinite percentage of the growth in the local news ecosystem is today. Started on a small base. But by the time we're done, by the time we're trying to give the money away starting in December over a period of 2.5 or 3 years, by the time we're done, the number of these organizations is going to be easily twice that, which means we're going to serve a very small portion of those, sort of like Stanford undergraduate admissions percentage low. And it's, as I said, it's a small base, but 10 years ago, when we started the Tribune, we sort of got patted on the head, and all the brilliant people in the news media said, this is kind of cute, but this is just a particularly bad recession. We're going to fix this. Maybe nonprofit news will represent a bridge to, some greater thing. Kind of a French fry. 10 years later, I'm here to tell you, it ain't the French fry. Nonprofit news is going to have to solve a big part of our local news problem. And if you think it's trivial, consider this. Sue Cross at INN, her membership's aggregate budget in 2018 was about $400 million. Digital newspaper subscriptions that we heard a lot of talk about yesterday, if you take out the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal, in aggregate, that's about how big that market is. And so the nonprofit news ecosystem this year may be bigger than digital subscriptions and newspapers. So it's not trivial. What we're talking about is an infrastructure that looks a little bit like public radio, about $1 billion in size, potentially 1,000 or so outlets, which is what public radio approximately has. This is how public radio is funded. What we're saying is take government funding, which in the fullness of time, maybe there should be a public policy shift that would address part of what we're talking about. But in the meantime, it's got to be philanthropy. And so think of target funding, a target revenue mix of, and I would say more like 20 to 40% or 20 to even 45% in each of 3 buckets: from the audience, from commercial sponsorship, from philanthropy. The point of the right-hand side of that chart is just to say it's not as heavy a lift as necessarily, or as you might think. So I'm gonna end there and just give you the briefest update on us, on the American Journalism Project. We will, with any luck, have our sort of criterion and processes for grant making communicated to our community in June, probably June 30th, if I were guessing, and make grants, our first maybe 3 or 4 in December. So that's sort of the cadence that we're on. I appreciate your attention. I appreciate all of you and everything you're doing. Just more than I can tell you.
See, I told you there were positive signs. I told you there was going to be a future for local news. So I'd like to begin, John, with you about the American Journalism Project and explain a little bit about why Knight Foundation made a decision to invest in what is a new approach to funding journalism. Because what the American Journalism Project does for philanthropy is it has created a philanthropic venture fund. So what does that mean? That means there's a vehicle where Knight Foundation and other foundations are investing dollars, and Knight Foundation's board approved $20 million over the next 5 years for this fund. The first $10 million is for the first raise. So it's applying the principles of venture capital. And Elizabeth Green, who is the mom of a brand new baby boy, and John just came together with this idea that venture capital has worked in the education reform movement. Okay, it has created a lot of charter schools that people don't like, but it became a very powerful vehicle to change the conversation about philanthropy. And that's what we need to do with journalism. We need people to understand that journalism is something that is so vital and important to our democracy that they must support it through membership, which is a form of philanthropy, and that foundations and other individuals must support it because it is so important to how people are informed in their communities. So I just wanted to wonder, John, if you could just tell us a little bit more about what makes the American Journalism Project different. It's not that you're just going to be re-granting to not-for-profits around the country. There's a real focus on delivering business and technology expertise and on generating revenue. And why is it important for a not-for-profit to generate revenue?
So one of the observations that Elizabeth and I had early on was, and we kind of had to check ourselves because it seemed too obvious to be true, but it seemed like the nonprofit news organizations that were growing had money. Okay, that seemed like a pretty interesting, pretty basic statement. But as it turned out, when you talk to people about this sector as a business, it wasn't as obvious to everybody as we felt like it was to us. Texas Tribune had the advantage of an upfront investment that allowed that team to hire revenue-producing people, and so guess what happened? They produced revenue. Chalkbeat had the ability, and lesser so to higher revenue producing people up front. Guess what happened? They produce revenue. Guess what happens with the revenue? Hires reporters.
Yes.
And so our only insight, if you will, and as I said, we've done precisely nothing yet, but our hypothesis is that if we can make smart grants to news organizations that have an aspiration to be entirely mission driven, and really smart in terms of commercial sensibilities and really sophisticated in terms of philanthropic fundraising, that's a better way to grow news gathering spend than is giving organizations money to hire reporters. So that was kind of the fundamental insight, or again, hypothesis.
Now, Hasneen, excuse me, I already put it on the Twitter, so it's true. You are one of the most dynamic local news leaders that I've met. Your story and your approach is so compelling. What is it, as a newcomer to the not-for-profit news space, do you think that you need to be successful and to execute on your excellent vision for Tyler?
First, I'm just glad I have dark skin because I'm blushing like crazy. So, so I should say, actually, in 2010, I joined the launch team of the Bay Citizen, and I went through that whole experience. I then went to Mother Jones Magazine, where I learned from the amazing Clara Jeffrey and Monica Bauerlein the importance of a diversified revenue stream. They were so good at showing reporters, here's our pie, let's talk about our pie. Then I went to NPR. So I've spent a lot of time in nonprofit newsrooms. Now I'm trying to build my own from scratch. And you guys are talking about not just investing in a newsroom, but investing in a newsroom's capacity to build itself. That's where I want to be. For my project to succeed in Tyler, it has to be of Tyler by Tyler. It can't feel like some people from out there are creating this thing in our community. It has to feel like it's people who care about Tyler and invest in Tyler are making it happen. And so that's where I want to be, but I know I can't get there right now by myself. My goal ultimately is to not need outside help, because that's not just a matter of business and pragmatism, but that's a matter of trust. That's a matter of my audience. I need to be able to tell that story about myself. Mm-hmm. So, I certainly have a lot of ideas about what that would look like, but for me, it's somebody to help me figure out my membership strategy, somebody to help me figure out my event strategy, somebody to help me talk to the seasoned philanthropists that I need to talk to. Sometimes it's little things like, when do you send the thank you? When do you approach this person? If I just had someone I could talk to about this stuff, that would help.
Well, I'm so delighted that you're going to be joining the Institute for Not-for-Profit News, because one of the programs that Knight Foundation, Democracy Fund, the MacArthur Foundation, Ethics and Excellence, and others fund helps not-for-profit organizations learn how to do that through a matching gifts program called Newsmatch.
It's great.
So you will be part of Newsmatch in 2019, but Newsmatch is not just a matching gifts program at the end of December. It is, in fact, a whole pathway that you can start right now that will help you build that email list, that will help you build that database of individual donors, and will guide you on how to really develop a successful fundraising campaign.
That's great.
Yeah. So Ryan, gosh, you said so many smart things in your presentation. Where do we begin? Doubling the number of State House reporters. You talked about collaboration. So increasingly, as we see that it's very difficult for a local news organization to support a newsroom of more than 200 people, collaboration does increase impact of reporting. And the way that you spoke about it, I thought was so important, that there are different types of collaboration. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Right. So the collaboration that we're doing with the local NBC affiliate just focuses on investigations. And so we produce 4 investigations over the course of 18 months, and some of those look the same, some of those look different. We're really using it as an opportunity to experiment with the form and think about what are our strengths and what are the strengths of local TV, and how can we combine them to do really impactful stories. But there are other TV stations, both in our market and throughout the state, who want to talk to us. Well, we know that the NBC affiliate is a fierce competitor with the ABC affiliate, right? We want to work with them both. And so we're having conversations with their competitors about, okay, maybe it's not that we do investigations. We're going to leave that with our collaboration with the NBC affiliate, but maybe there's a geographic region in your coverage area that you just can't get to. And so when news breaks, maybe we can send a reporter out there, get a little bit of video, and maybe we structure the collaboration that way. We're even talking to some local newspapers who are looking to hire reporters. After our Natchez event, the editor came up to me and said, we're looking to hire 2 people. Let us know if anybody has come across your radar who would be good for us to hire. Well, what I want to do is be those reporters, right? Because we have a staff of 16. I can send a person to Natchez for a couple weeks and do anything that they need us to do. And down the line, maybe we talk about some sort of cost sharing, but we want to be a resource to our legacy media. And so we've had a lot of receptive conversations around those types of partnerships, but somebody's just got to pull the trigger on it. I mean, you can't always just keep the conversation going. Like somebody has to pick up the phone and make the thing happen. We think that Mississippi Today is the organization in Mississippi that can do that and probably needs to do it.
Thank you. And in Philadelphia, Jim, through the Solutions Journalism Network project on re-entry. So as a startup in Philadelphia, you had an opportunity to observe the lack of collaboration among many news organizations in Philadelphia. How did that Solutions Journalism Network approach and collaboration change?
Well, it took a while. I mean, I think when we showed up in Philadelphia, we weren't trying to put anybody else out of business. It wasn't our idea that we're going to come in here and we wanted to be part of the ecosystem. And what we tried to do is design where we thought we could fit a certain demographic we were going to go after. We were going after younger Philadelphians. We were aiming at that where we didn't think anybody was, but we knew that we couldn't do it on our own. And so we tried to, in all 3 of the cities, we tried to do a lot of partnerships, and we made more progress collectively with the Philadelphia project, where we were working with lots of other organizations to cover one issue. We also did a long reporting series with the Philly Inquirer on SEPTA, the transit system in Philly. And so, I mean, we did a lot of collaborations, but it's not easy. It doesn't come now. My argument, as a guy who spent a lot of his life in legacy media, it doesn't come naturally to collaborate with other people in legacy, especially if you're the biggest player in town. You still have this attitude that why would I want people who read me to find other people, which is, I think, insane, because any smart news consumer probably knows most of the sources in their market. But in Philly, it really worked out well. And I think one of the things that happens every time another Broken Philly meeting happens, people come back and they say, it's amazing how well this is going. I think everybody expected it to be a fight. It's like, let's get 19 news organizations to play nicely together. They probably had armed security at the first meeting.
Yeah, you end up with 10.
Yeah, you end up with 10, but they've all worked really well together. And every time that's always the reaction after every meeting, and it's going down now because I think people are now getting used to the fact that it's going to be fine. But it was really hard. But I really, as I said before, I think you have to look at a city as, if you look at it as a roulette table, you have to have one chip on everything or 2 chips on some things, but you can't stack everything on 2 numbers like politics and high school sports. Because outside of that, there's 1,000 things that are not going to get covered at all. But that requires you to be willing to collaborate, and I think that's still the last hurdle.
And also figure out what it is that you're going to cover.
Yeah.
So we'd love to take questions from the audience because, oh my goodness.
I'm going to throw. Go. Oh.
Got it. My name is Lisa Cohen. I am at the Columbia Journalism School. I run the DuPont Columbia Awards, which is for audio and video. And I'm particularly interested, I think, Ryan, you talked about collaborations with local television stations. And we're seeing more and more of that in our entrants and in our winners. And I wanted to hear a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of how you go about doing that. Do you approach them? They approach you? How does it work?
Right. So the grant that we got from the Knight Foundation allowed us to hire a reporter who works with the chief investigative reporter at the NBC affiliate. What we did not want to do was for our reporter to do their piece and their reporter to do their piece, and they spin off a story, we spin off a story, and call it a collaboration. We also didn't want to go into it thinking that we were the smart newspaper people and they were the dumb TV people, and we were going to make their story smarter. We recognized that, in terms of visual storytelling, there was a lot that we could also learn because we don't do video well. And so, what we've learned is that there's a lot of value in experimentation. There's, probably some thought that should have gone in on some of the front end. I feel like sometimes that the local TV reporter, we're asking their station to let them come over and play with us because, we hired the reporter. And so we need to think through some of those things and who's paying for FOIAs and who's paying for travel and that kind of stuff. And so we've worked it out, but it's really been a learning experience.
There's one here.
Thank you. My name is Gabriela Vivanco. I work at a newspaper group in Ecuador. There's a lot of people in the audience from different parts of Latin America, and it is an issue in our countries about philanthropy because it's not as strong or sort of sophisticated as it is in the US. And so I wanted to get your input. I know, Jim, you mentioned about culture or other things that you expect to see as more traditional media companies transition into a diversified revenue stream. What are the things that you have seen that work within the company or the necessary steps that are urgent or need to be taken for media companies to become more sustainable over time?
So I can just jump in and just tell you we have a very successful program here in the U.S. It's called the Table Stakes Program, and Neil Chase, who is sitting right behind you, can tell you a little bit more about it. And it's an effort to bring and address culture change in legacy news organizations to really address the biggest challenge of all, which is strategic alignment. And as Jim said, the culture change issues.
Yeah, I would just add one thing is the 10 things I had on my slide. If the culture doesn't change, almost none of those things can happen. Everything is downstream of culture change, and I think if there's, if your culture's not changing fast enough, if you don't have a fair amount of pissed off, uncomfortable people.
Then, as a Latin American and a person who has been working in the last 20 plus years of helping Latin American journalism, I can tell you that the fact that we don't have a philanthropy tradition there, it doesn't mean that we are not going to have. Many things that people say in Latin America for years, oh, this is gringo thing, here is not going to work. We are seeing actually a proliferation of non-profits in Latin America, and there is hope. And there is the great work of Sembra Media that we're going to hear about this afternoon. So there are things happening. There's one there. Oh. And then.
I am Christian from Colombia, local journalist. In the world news deserts grow. If journalism is a public service, should public funds fund local journalists?
Should the government?
Governments.
Yeah, that's a good question. No?
Sure.
No problem.
We decided in the commission not to focus on government.
Yeah. I've become fond of saying should and other people's money don't belong in the same sentence very, very easily, or shouldn't. Whoops. Personal belief, I believe in the United States, to me the bigger question is, what is your society value? And we in the United States have gotten ourselves into a pickle because what we thought we valued, we kind of don't now, and we don't know what to do about it. And so in the fullness of time, I think there does have to be a public policy shift. I'm not familiar with public policy in your country, but it's in the U.S., it's just out of step with commercial realities. I don't know that that's ever going to happen. It's certainly not going to happen in this administration. I don't even know what I'd do if I were God exactly. But what we do think is that in the interim, these organizations need to get sharper commercially, and philanthropy's got to take up a lot of the slack.
Jennifer, last question.
My question is for Tasneem. I was wondering if you could tell us what slides we missed.
No, on, she went back.
I'll post them. I'll post them.
Were there any major takeaways that we didn't get to see from your presentation?
Flip. No, I don't think so.
She came back. I mean, it's not my fault. one more question. Here.
So you were talking about fielding questions from the community. Can you tell me exactly how you fielded them, if you put something on your website or social media?
Yeah, I started just with digital distribution, just simple, right? Like, what's the lowest friction, lowest barrier to entry? It was started with just email and Google Doc. Google Spreadsheets. I quickly understood that I'm only reaching my audience, which is it's a lot younger than the traditional media in town, which is great. But it's plugged in people, it's highly educated people, it's resourced people. So that's where a few months ago I started printing out copies of my survey and taking them with me to all different community groups. So that's the Getting Ahead program I talked about. That's I'm setting up a meeting with the Tyler Young Professionals Network. Just who are the different groups that aren't represented right now in my database? And where are they? They're out there. How do I make this easy for me and just go to their meetings? Like, go to other people's meetings. It's a really great way of getting their attention. Also, community meeting organizers love guest speakers because it's less work for them. So the groups I'm trying to meet, how are they currently organizing themselves? And how do I get an invitation to come be where they are? And don't do it digitally. If it makes sense to do it digitally with that group, do it. But I have just found the most value in paper printouts, and I don't just say, here's this thing, fill it out. We go and we make it a conversation. So it's, all right, here's my first question. In the last 12 months, what's an area, what's an information gap where not knowing something affected your quality of life in a bad way? I also ask a really important question. What do you wish other people better understood about Tyler? I get some of my best questions that way. Go where they're at.
Okay, so thank you very much. This was a great panel. So we're gonna have the lunch break now, but we have the Facebook Journalism Project workshop, Instagram story for editors. So if you are registered for that, there'll be in English and in Spanish. English at the Capitol Room and Spanish at the Dell Classroom. And remember that for this afternoon, we're going to have a strong grand finale, right, with Matt. If you have not watched Epic 2015, take the lunch break and Google it and watch it, because Matt is going to be talking about it. And this afternoon, we're going to have the international panel also, and the White House panel, and they're going to be awesome. So come here in the afternoon, okay? Don't miss it. And now have a good lunch.